John for item 1, which is the notice and summons of meeting.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. To all members of the Governance and Strategic Planning Committee. You're hereby summoned to attend the monthly meeting of the committee, which will be a hybrid meeting to be conducted both remotely via WebEx and physically today in the Council Chamber, Tuesday the 4th of October at 4 o'clock. And Chair, starting with the roll call, Alderman Breslin.
Here, John.
Alderman Devaney.
Here, John.
Alderman Hussey.
Online, John.
Are they all here? Okay. Can't hear them. Members who are online, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Just pause for a moment, members, just to make sure that we can be heard. So is there anybody who's online? Can they let us know if you can hear us okay?
Yes,
You can hear us.
We can hear you, John, but can you hear us?
Okay.
Yes.
They can hear us, we just can't hear.
Okay, thank you. Those who are online, you can hear us, but unfortunately, just at the moment, we can't hear you, so we'll try to rectify that. Thank you. Alderman Thompson.
Here, John.
Thompson online. Thank you, Alderman Thompson. Councillor Raymond Barr.
Here, John.
Thank you. Councillor John Boyle. Thank you.
Here.
Councillor Gary Donnelly. Thank you. Councillor Farrell.
Here.
And Councillor Fleming.
Sure, John.
Online. Thank you.
John, Councillor McHugh.
Chair.
Councillor McGee.
Sorry, I haven't turned the page. This has been the story of my life. Councillor Heaney.
Sure.
Councillor McGinley.
And Shaw.
Councillor McHugh.
Chop.
Nine. Councillor Mooney.
Here.
And Councillor Tierney.
Apologies for Councillor Tierney.
Apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Moving on to item 3, which is the broadcasting statement. I would like to remind everyone present at this meeting in the Guildhall or in attendance remotely. This meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. This broadcast may be terminated or suspended in accordance with our protocol. Due to your attendance at this meeting, you're consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images for broadcasting or training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Members and approved speakers are reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting and to use the chat facility to highlight any request to speak. A copy of the council privacy notice may be found on the council website. So that moves us on to item 4, which is the declarations of members' interests. If anybody has any declarations to make, they can do so now, or they can do so throughout the meeting, and we'll have them noted accordingly. Which moves us to item 5, which is our deputation. I just want to check, have we got the sound working for the housing executive?
It's Grania Long here. Yes, I'll just.
Yeah, Grania, we can hear you. That's great. You're very welcome. I'll hand over. Grania, I know yourself and Eddie is there. I'm not too sure if there's anybody else online for yourselves, but I'll hand over to you once we get your representation up on screen.
Thank you very much.
Just in reference to members, just so you know, Grania is only available till 5:30 today. So I would like to put that, just have that in mind when we're asking questions following the presentation. Excellent.
Excellent. It's always a relief to see the presentation arrive. Thank you very much. If you're content, Chair, I'll press on and I'll try to cover this in about 15 minutes, and then that leaves as much time as possible for questions. So first of all, to say thank you very much for having us along this afternoon. I'm Grania Long. I'm the Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Housing Executives. There are quite a number of my colleagues also on the call. Eddie, you probably know very, very well, who obviously leads many of the local teams and works very closely with councillors in the local area. So just to say, this is the third and the final update to the original plan, the 2019 to 23 Housing Investment Plan. And what I will do over the course of the next few minutes is to talk you through the scale and the nature of our investment locally, and what we hope will be very positive impacts for communities locally. And what I'll talk you through is not just in terms of the financial investment, but also the non-financial investment, and what that means in terms of both social impact, economic impact, and environmental impact. And I suppose what's very important from our perspective in the Housing Executive is that while the Housing Investment Plan is something that we are required to come and to present to you on, we're not just here because we have to be here, we're here because we want to be here as your partner, as a community planning partner. The role and the function and the partnership that we undertake with council is extremely important to us, and ultimately it's about building more homes, sustaining those homes, maintaining those homes, and obviously then providing the range of services that we provide. So I'll just ask to move on to the next slide. Thank you. And I suppose just in terms of that partnership and that relationship locally, what's really, really important from our perspective as your community planning partner is the strength of that partnership working. And if you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you. So obviously, you know, in terms of our work with council and our statutory partners, you know, our focus here is to ensure that the strategic growth plan for the city and for the surrounding areas and council area is delivered, and that the objectives set out in that growth plan and the community plan are central to the work that we do within the council area. As part of that work, we're obviously leading, the Housing Executive is leading on key actions in terms of promotion of a sustainable and a balanced mix of residential living. And that's the key point for us, is, you know, in terms of both not just the homes that we manage as a landlord, but the homes that we commission through the social housing development programme with housing associations, that they are sustainable, that they engender a balanced mix of living, and fundamentally then enable your community plan and the community plan for the council to be delivered. We've jointly commissioned research very recently to assess the challenges and the constraints, and that's a really important priority for us, is that where we can, working in partnership with you, we are reducing and removing barriers to sustainable growth, and particularly from a housing point of view and from a community development point of view. So that's very important to us. And so, you know, working together, our focus is on a balanced and a sustainable city centre concept. And again, a lot of work ongoing, and in fact the group's going to reconvene, I think, in November, to map specific needs across a range of groups, and that work is very important, and actually will also inform the decisions that we take as a housing executive in terms of our investment. And hopefully, I hope when we're back, not just next year but in future years, that what we're able to then do is to report to councillors on the success of that partnership, and hopefully that means more homes and sustainable housing, and that mix of residential living, getting the balance right between urban living and rural living in those key places. So just to move on to the next slide, I wanted to cover the scale of the investment last year. I'm very pleased to say that last year, the Housing Executive invested just over 97 million in the Derry City and Strabane council area, and that's a mix of investment across a range of functions. I suppose most obviously in green there is investment in new build social housing. It was a very, very healthy programme last year, a very good programme, and working in partnership with housing associations, what you saw was a steady increase in social housing provision, and we want to build on that, and I'll come on to how we want to do that in the future. You'll also see quite a level of investment in planned maintenance of our own stock. So as a landlord, obviously, investing heavily in our stock is critically important. We actually invested across the piece in its entirety across the region. We invested more last year than we have done since 2007. So it's a real priority of ours to ensure that that investment is spent, that we are getting planned works out the door and delivered for our tenants and in the best interest of communities. And there's never been a more important time given the cost of living crisis, and in particular the levels of fuel poverty and the need for investment in people's homes. And that's why it's all the more important that we're getting that investment out the door, and we're continuing to do that. So both across those two blue areas, just over 9.4 million in planned maintenance and 4.8 million in response maintenance. That's the job of any landlord to get that work done and to do that with our tenants, not to our tenants, and working very closely on the ground. And that's what the team, what Eddie's team does locally and does so well. You'll also see 8.5 million investment in supporting people, and that's a very, very important fund that ensures that with our voluntary community sector partners, we are supporting people to live in the community, and that's hugely important. And and the work that we do locally with the voluntary community sector to deliver supporting people really does make a difference to people, and ensures that, as I say, they're able to live in their homes and live sustainably. To do that, and again, I'm happy to cover any of the other areas, but I think probably best to move on to the next slide in the interest of time, and I can come back to any particular issues, whether it's adaptations or other programs. So just moving on to the next slide then, in terms of what's to come this year. So we never include the social housing programme in the forward-looking slide, because we really don't know what's delivered until the end of the year. But I'm certainly happy to talk you through the programme and what's coming up this year. But a very, very healthy, you will see a very healthy planned maintenance programme for this year, for 22-23. That increase up to 11 million, and that's really going to benefit our tenants locally in terms of improvements to their homes, hopefully, and as much as we can, improvement in the thermal efficiency of homes, and in particular just want to draw your attention to 5 million that we'll be spending on our retrofit programme, and that's a programme that's part funded by the European Regional Development Fund, that's ERDF, and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, where we are undertaking retrofits across the region, but particularly for this council area, a very healthy ERDF retrofit programme in the year to come. And never a better time to be retrofitting people's homes and making them as thermally efficient and energy efficient as we possibly can. And we're also learning a great deal as an organisation in terms of building our skills and our capacity in retrofit, because while we are looking at retrofitting 1,900 homes across Northern Ireland in this 3-year period, ultimately we need to retrofit all our homes by 2050. And so we've started well, but we have a lot more work to do. And I think our focus now has to be on building skills locally and working closely with our private sector partners to make sure that we're building expertise and capacity so that we can invest more heavily in the future. So I'm hoping in future years I'll be coming back to present to you that we are investing far more than 5 million a year on retrofit. That's certainly our vision and our goal. You'll also be pleased to see, I hope, continued investment in supporting people, and given the levels of homelessness and housing need amongst a range of groups, vulnerable and otherwise, I think the importance of investment in support, you will imagine, has never been more pressing. So just moving on to the waiting list. And this really does focus the mind, and you will all know this and be very much aware of this, that what you see in terms of this council area is since 2018 an upward trend in the number of households applying to be on the waiting list, so up as high as 5,500 annually, and then those numbers in housing stress, just over 4,000, so very high numbers. And when you compare that with the number of allocations, the number of new allocations to social housing that we're able to make, then you can see the gap between demand for social housing and the availability of new allocations is far too great, and that's where our attention is and where it needs to continue to be in the coming years. So just to move on, as I talk through the nature of provision in the local area, obviously the total number of homes, and that's a 2016 figure, is 60,000. We have, as a landlord, 8,676 homes, and you can see the mix there and the balance between owner occupation of 50 to 56%, social rent of 24%, and the private rented sector at 20%. And that balance actually, compared to other council areas, the proportion of socially rented provision in Derry City and Strabane is a little higher, is relatively higher than elsewhere. And probably getting the balance right, actually, with the various different types of tenures. And moving on, then I just want to talk you through the homelessness trends. And this will not be new to any of you because you're working and living locally, but obviously the scale of homelessness continues to grow, and that's for a number of reasons. Just if you can move on to the next slide, thank you. But that's for a number of reasons. The impact of COVID and COVID-19 continues very much to be felt by people experiencing homelessness. We had significant growth in demand when COVID initially hit. Our supply challenges remained, and in particular, the availability of accommodation for people experiencing homelessness was constrained, but we also saw presentations from a whole range of households and individuals, particularly those who had informal arrangements. So if someone was sofa surfing or was living in very informal arrangements, the pandemic required those people to find new arrangements, and they came obviously and presented, and that was one of the factors influencing that upward growth. We would have expected, and I think I said this to you last year, we would have expected those numbers to possibly to taper off by now, but what we've begun to see now already is a significant increase in the number of people who are losing their tenancies in the private rented sector. Those numbers are increasing. We expect them to grow, and the economic headwinds that are ahead, I think, are extremely concerning in relation to the impact that may have on the numbers. And you can see there, while the number of homeless presenters and the number of acceptances has stayed fairly steady, what you're seeing is the households placed in temporary accommodation significantly increasing, and that is due to the lack of accommodation and available accommodation for people experiencing homelessness. So we are really struggling to access new forms of temporary accommodation, and as a result, we are spending significant amounts on what we would say as non-standard forms of temporary accommodation. So we don't want to be placing households in hotels and bed and breakfasts. We do it only where we have to, but the numbers are such that, and you can see that level of demand, the numbers are such that our spend is growing significantly. And of course, that leads me to the point that the more money that we spend on expensive forms of non-standard accommodation, that leaves us less money to be preventative and to invest in prevention. And really what we want and what the focus of our attention is and needs to be is on ensuring that we are investing in prevention rather than response. We are not there yet, and I have to say the challenges that we are facing, not just the housing executives, but I think generally speaking across the public sector in terms of demand and constraints on our budgets, are leading us to not being in a position where we can fund prevention enough. And I hope that will change. We certainly hope it will change in the not too distant future. So just moving on to the next slide and to look specifically at some of the challenges locally. A number of challenges, and not all of these are, just to be very clear, not all of these are challenges that we consider necessarily to be negative, but they are certainly things that we need to think about as a landlord. 20% of the population will be, by 2030, will be over 65. And that's a positive thing in the sense that that's a positive factor that we now know, people are living longer, they're, and also experiencing higher levels of health. But it does mean that we have to think differently about how we design housing and the housing services that we provide. And that's a significant area of focus for us. As I said earlier, investing in our existing stock, we've certainly been ramping up the level of investment that we're making in our stock. We want to continue to do that. And that's all about increasing health and well-being, reducing fuel poverty and inequality. There's no doubt it is a challenging market, both in terms of contractors being able to access supply chains and labour, and also the cost of materials and the cost of labour, but we are certainly working through that and happy to speak more about that. I've already talked about the levels of housing stress and the importance of providing solutions while demand exceeds supply, and as I say, you can see the numbers there in terms of homelessness. But I think what's very important, and I'm sure you're all experiencing this, is the fact that we are dealing with increasingly vulnerable households, with obviously many with very complex needs, And I think, I would pay tribute to the voluntary and community sector partners that we work with locally. And I think that partnership working, including with council too, really does make all the difference, quite frankly. Moving on now to the next slide and to the new build programme. And as I said, a healthy programme last year, though I have to say we want to continue to build on that. 148 new homes completed, but very importantly, 1,300 new social homes under construction in March of this year, and that will contribute, as you know, greatly to housing need in the local area. But obviously, when we look to future housing requirements, we need to keep that pace going, and just over 4,000 new social homes needed over the next 5 years. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we are doing locally to meet that target. In terms of our performance, both in terms of the social housing development programme and more generally. So moving on, just in the interest of time, we can cover some of this in questions, I'm sure. I wanted to mention just before I finish 2 further really strong areas of focus by the Housing Executive locally. And one is obviously being very clear that we have a very, very significant role in helping to mitigate the effects of the cost of living crisis for our customers more generally and our tenants. And just to ask to move forward to the next slide, thank you. Some of the ways in which we do that is to focus our support across a range of areas and a range of sectors. We have an independent energy advice service that's available to everyone. So again, I would just encourage councillors to be aware of that, and please do refer members of the public, refer your customers to, or your members of your community to us. That energy advice service signposts individuals to a range of services, including our affordable warmth scheme, which you will be aware of, and our boiler replacement scheme. And both of those are critically important for helping households to respond to the cost of living crisis, and particularly on energy. We have significant spend available and funding available on both schemes, and it is very, very important that we are making the case to the public to avail of those if they are eligible. I wanted to specifically mention the boiler replacement scheme because we have, there is considerable funding available for that. I think, making sure that members of the public are informed and very well informed is critically important. I mean, just anecdotally, we're getting some evidence to us from across the piece, not just our own tenants, but from customers more generally, that they are maybe a little bit more reticent about replacing their boiler this year and switching from oil to gas, for example. And obviously our advice, and the advice that we are giving members of the public, is that a new boiler is is always going to be a much more efficient system. So again, I would just reiterate that advice, and please do refer members of the public to us if you think they are eligible for either of those 2 schemes. We want to hear from them. We have, there is spend available, and we want to make sure we get that out the door, and never a more important year for it. So just my last slide, if you can just move forward to it, thank you very much, is our, I suppose our areas of focus, and then I'll stop, Lord Mayor, just to be aware of where our focus is. I think I've talked enough about sustainable development and the importance of ensuring that our tenants and all households live in warm homes. We will retrofit 1,900 homes in this 3-year period. We want to build on that, and we want to be in a position whereby we're retrofitting all of our stock. But I think we've also got a very important role as the Energy Authority, as the Home Energy Conservation Authority in Northern Ireland, to give wider energy advice, and through our grants such as affordable warmth and so on, to help to help as many people as we can. I think the second point will be of interest to members, because, and I spoke about this last year, we have a significant investment requirement in terms of ensuring that we can invest in our own stock. And the minister has made a commitment to free the Housing Executive up in order to borrow to fund that investment requirement and to add to new supply, so to start building homes again, and it's very important that that work continues. We're also making sure that through our public procurement that we are investing in social value, and we're extracting social value. So for example, our planned maintenance contracts, in particular, are one of our very large maintenance contracts, ensuring that all contracts have apprenticeship requirements built in, so that we are creating jobs and investing in skills, and we are doing that at scale. And I think the final few points just to make there is, it's very, very important that as a big landlord and as a housing authority, we involve our customers in the decisions that affect their lives. We've been doing that in terms of looking at ways we can mitigate and alleviate the cost of living crisis. And I think we couldn't do that work, quite frankly, without our customers and our tenants giving us that feedback and helping us to shape those interventions so that they're the right interventions in the right way. I've talked about the importance of prevention in homelessness. I think we'll spend somewhere between 18 and 20 million on homelessness regionally this year. Only $500,000 of that is on prevention, and that's not good enough. We need to move out of emergency mode and into prevention. And I think that final point, just being a delivery partner for all of government. So that means focusing on economic and activity and green growth and all of those really important areas of focus. So, our housing is never just about homes, it's also about sustainable local growth. And I think that brings me back to your community plan and the importance of our partnership and working together. So, Chair, I will finish there. I've spoken for longer than I intended. Apologies. And we're very happy. My team colleagues are here. We're happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Grania. And just on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for coming in and for the work that the Housing Executive are doing continuously. We do have a growing list of councillors who want to speak. So we'll make a start on the questions, and hopefully we can get some answers for those councillors that have questions. So the first indicated speaker is Councillor Minnie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Grania, for the presentation. It was extremely detailed and informative, as usual. I know we have a growing list here, and I won't keep you long. Just have really 2 points, or 2 questions, sorry. In your slide on page 9, I note that you've detailed the future housing requirements for over the next 5 years is 4,126. And you note as well that there's 1,330 new social homes under construction at the end of March 22. I was wondering, could you give me some detail as to when you expect those units to be completed and possibly come into allocation for the housing stock? And my second point is probably my usual parochial point is, would you have an update in relation to the Triangle refurbishment scheme in the Waterside area of the city? Thank you, Grania.
I'm just going to take a couple of councillors, Grania, and then we'll come back to you. I'll take 2 or 3 at a time. Councillor Heaney, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Grania for the presentation. Just sort of 2 questions and maybe a comment. Just first one's a parochial one, as assuming most councillors will do. Obviously, the residents of the Glen Estate are eagerly awaiting their window replacement scheme as part of your planned maintenance programme, and have received letters to that effect. However, it's my understanding that the contractor appointed to do the work has withdrawn to it not being cost effective for them anymore, and that's leaving the scheme in trouble in terms of how they get a new contractor in place. So we'll appreciate it if there's any update on that and when that situation will be resolved and that planned maintenance continue. Obviously, it's urgently needed at this time of year. The second sort of question is on the. It just took a brain fade there. Just left it. I'll make my comment first and maybe it'll come back to me. But it was on, sorry, I recall, it was on gas and on your sort of boiler replacement scheme. Obviously, with the situation around gas prices at the minute, there's a clear reluctance of any of your tenants who have yet to transfer over onto gas. So are what you're saying as part of your presentation that it's now the Housing Executive are content that people do not transfer to gas at this time and can stay with the boilers that they currently have, because that's not the impression. People still feel under pressure that they have to change over, and that's making them rightly nervous given the continued rising of gas prices. And then the comment, like it's goes without saying that the waiting list figures are just totally unacceptable. It's every councillor, I'm sure, in this council will know that this is 70% of the work that that comes at you, that people are, the waiting list is just out of control. What is your, I suppose, you've touched it in some way, but is the main strategy to try and address that simply just to increase the new builds? And there are elements to address this serious problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heaney. Councillor Farrell, I'll bring you in, then Grania, I'll let you come in after that, 'cause there's quite a few questions there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Grania, for coming today. And actually, I'd like to pay tribute to the fantastic team of people that you have working across the various offices in Derry. You know, the Geralts, the Chloes, the Carries, the Andrews. You know, they are just magnificent people that go above and beyond, and they are a credit to your organisation. And from a corporate perspective, I want to welcome the £100 million that you invested across this council area last year. It's well needed, and we hope that it's sustained over the coming years. But I want to touch briefly on the waiting lists and the new build programme. So 775 properties were allocated across Derry and Strabane last year, and the waiting list went from 5,557 to 5,531. That's a reduction of 26. And housing stress actually increased from 3,951 to over 4,000. So we allocated over 800 properties in the last year, and that's had a negligible impact on the waiting list. And the number of people facing housing stress has actually increased. If we look at the last 5 years, we've allocated nearly 3,800 properties, and the waiting list has grown by over 1,000. And so that data suggests that regardless of how many houses we build, the waiting list is growing and growing and growing. So I note in the pack and in your comments that 4,000 houses are needed across this city and district in the next 5 years. And I agree with that assessment. But the question is about funding for that. Are you confident that there is an appropriate funding strategy in place to build those 4,000 houses? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farrell. Grania, I'll pass over to you, and then we'll do the next few round of speakers. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll cover as much of that as I can, and then I'm going to ask my colleagues to come in as well. So I just wanted to just go immediately back on the issue of gas, and so just to be really clear, the point that I was making was that we are getting anecdotal evidence from some of our tenants that they are reticent, they are hesitant about transferring from oil to gas boilers, and our advice to them is not to be hesitant, because a brand new boiler will be more efficient than your old boiler, and therefore, while gas prices are clearly, as we all know, increasing, a more efficient gas boiler will always be better than a less efficient oil boiler. Okay, a newer boiler will always be more efficient. Oil prices are also going up, and I think what tends to happen is attention and media attention tends to focus on gas. So, you know, as the Home Energy Conservation Authority, as an energy advice organisation, then our advice to all customers will be find the most efficient system, because ultimately you want your home to be as energy efficient as possible. That means you will use less of whatever your fuel source is, and then so you're always better off with a more efficient system, and therefore, and a new boiler will always be more efficient than your old boiler. So we are strongly encouraging our tenants where boiler replacement, where programs are coming forward, and new heating systems are being brought forward. We are spending as much time as we can with our tenants and our residents to inform them so that they might make the right decision, and they go ahead with that change to their heating system. I'll give I suppose a general comment in relation to new house building, new social housing, and then I'll ask colleagues to come in locally who from our place shaping team and others in relation to new supply. I mean, I think fundamentally, you know, the numbers clearly speak for themselves in terms of waiting list and waiting list trends, and the number of new homes that are coming forward. Like I said, we have had you know, a healthy programme in the last number of years. But as you have said, and as others have said, you know, the gap between demand and supply is significant, and I think that's why it is so important that the planning authority, i.e. yourselves, and the housing authority, ourselves, and that place shaping partnership that is ongoing is so important. My colleague Louise will come in a moment on this, but you know, whether it's the identification of sites, whether it's the work with housing associations in putting the prospectus together, whether it's the work ongoing to ensure that, you know, where we can through planning and in other ways to unblock any obstacles that come together, including working together with Northern Ireland Water on any particular constraints that are there because of wastewater infrastructure. There is a huge programme of work ahead, but I have to say, you know, I am confident, given having looked at the what's coming forward in the pipeline, that, you know, certainly for this council area, there is you know, there is without question the commitment, not just from the housing executive, but as I can see from council on this. I mean, I think the question on is the funding available is a very, very good question. So far, over the last number of years, the level of investment for social housing in Northern Ireland has been very strong relative to other jurisdictions, and the level of grant for housing associations to build is also strong relative to other jurisdictions. So the funding landscape for now, and I say that for now, has been a positive one. But I think the challenges that we've seen is that the level of need that was built up over time was so great that, you know, it was always going to take us time to eat into that. I think, you know, you know, obviously, and I would say this, that, you know, I look forward to the housing executive also being able to add to new supply, and I think that's very, very important too. I'll hand over to Louise maybe to cover some more local issues and some of the work that we're doing to kind of unblock some of those difficult challenges also. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you, Gráinne. Just to add to what Gráinne is saying there, and you can see from a number of appendices in the housing investment document itself, there is quite a substantial new build programme that we have lined up over the next 3 years for the council area. There's 30 schemes on site at the moment, and one of the councillors asked a question there about the time frame for completion of those. They're programmed to be on site this year, but they will have different completion dates. But I can do a follow-up response in terms of the completion dates for the individual schemes, if that will be helpful. But they'll all be different. Some will finish complete in this year, some won't complete until next year. In addition to what Gráinne is saying there, we do quite a bit of work in terms of working with our housing association colleagues and partners around trying to identify sites across the borough suitable for social housing development. However, we're relying on housing associations to come forward with sites, and that doesn't happen as much as we would like. We actively look for opportunity sites ourselves and flag those up to housing associations where we can. And we do take advantage of opportunity sites that come through the public sector disposal process when we can. And a number of skill sites have been developed locally, and they're part of that programme that you see. Our commission prospectus is reviewed annually and posted up on our websites, which directs our housing association colleagues to focus their efforts on areas of acute housing need. So as Gráinne said there, we do quite a piece of work with housing associations and with council as well, in trying to access land for housing and trying to have as an active a programme as we possibly can. But the numbers don't stack up in terms of meeting that need, and you can see there where we have a projected need of over 4,000 units over the next 5 years. We do have over 3,000 on the programme, but turnover and those units will not meet all of the housing need in the locality.
Like me just there to cover, there was 2 other issues that I didn't cover: Waterside Triangle, and also then the issue with placement. If it's helpful, I can do that now. So just to say,
Gráinne, sorry, your mic's really quiet there. We're struggling to hear what you were saying. One sec.
If I can change that, is that any better?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So just on Waterside Triangle, yes, I mean, I suppose pleased to say, you know, we've we had submitted a revised business plan for the refurbishment scheme at Waterside Triangle. That has now received departmental approval, which I'm sure you're aware. We're now taking forward at a senior level within the Housing Executive cross-departmental discussions to deliver now those solutions to the issues that have been identified through the recent consultations. Those are ongoing. In fact, they've been taking place this week. And I'm sure elected members on this call are aware of what some of those issues are locally. So certainly our intention is to obviously to keep very much moving forward on that. And Eddie's here. He may want to say further, but I'm sure is happy to and will be intending to meet with members outside of this discussion on those issues and to take those issues further. And just before I give Eddie the opportunity to come in, yes, and on the issue of the Glen Estate and the window replacement, yes, I'm aware of those issues. And in fact, there are a number of issues in relation to some of our contractors and the ability of our contractors to deliver on tenders. I suppose just on a general point, and just to say we fully appreciate that is extremely difficult for tenants, and we are always very, very sorry that when issues arise where contractors are unable to deliver, what we say first and foremost is, we get out there and we speak to residents as quickly as we can, to tenants as quickly as we can, and try to explain to them how this has come about. With all of our contracts and contractors right now where we are experiencing difficulty, we are in negotiation to try and, where we can, apply uplifts to those contracts where it's possible to do it within the terms of the contract, and where contractors are able to demonstrate evidence to do so. So in a number of instances, we're able to resolve those issues. I won't speak about individual contracts, you'll understand why, but we are working very, very hard to ensure that where we can apply uplifts, both because of material cost increases, but also labour cost increases, we will do so, as I say, as long as the evidence supports that. We are content to do that where the contract allows. Eddie, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add on Waterside Triangle.
Yeah, Grania, yeah, as you says, we have the revised business case approved, and just to confirm the elected members, we have done our consultation. We're very aware of the issues that has been raised as a part of that consultation. They are complicated issues, and I was glad that we were in a meeting yesterday with Ballymena, and we have a senior team very, very interested and dedicated to the delivery of this scheme. I'm hoping to go back to elected members even outside this forum, because a lot of them will contact me outside this forum and have discussions in and around where our developments or our solutions are looking to be. Quite happy to meet with either collectively members from that board or individually. But we would be hoping to go back to consultation fairly soon. At the minute, we're solution finding mode, and we're solution finding mode with a very, very senior team within the Housing Executive. So we're determined to deliver it, and hopefully we'll come up with some solutions to the problems very soon.
Thank you. Happy to take a few more questions then, Grania?
Thank you, yes.
Perfect. Next on my list there is Councillor Logue.
Hello, Grania, and I'm sorry, I forgot your other Sinead, is it? No,
It's
not
Louise,
Sinead.
Patricia.
Louise, sorry.
It's all right.
Senior moment there, Louise, but thank you very much, Grania, for your presentation. And it is heartening to see the much money that has been spent on bills and all of the other things that Housing Executive do, and the future proposals that are for 22-23. And I do hope that the Minister's proposal for the capacity to borrow will help address with the actual housing stress figures. So, it won't come as any surprise that I especially want to touch on that. And we do know that has been mentioned earlier that there has been so many allocations, but that has made little dent on the housing waiting list. So that really needs to be looked at, and I think we need to be looking at more ways in how we can come up with housing solutions. And I know I would have mentioned this before in a more, maybe not, maybe just in a conversation mode, but I'm going to actually propose that the Housing Executive do something about this today in line on what I was thinking. And it might do little to address some of the housing stress. However, I do think it would address it some way, and I think that would help, no matter how little it is. And I'm going to ask the Housing Executive to do a survey of all their homes, of who exactly, you know, there could be a family home and it is no longer classed as a family home, where parents have died, all their siblings have moved on, and maybe one person living in a 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom house. Now, if they want to downsize, I'm not saying people should or be pushed out of their home in any way. That's not what I'm saying, and I want to make that clear from the start. And people shouldn't be threatened or feel threatened, you know, if the survey does take place. But there are some people waiting on the transfer list, and they will go on to the ordinary housing allocation points, and all maybe they would have would be 20 points for bedroom under occupation. They're going, let's be realistic, folks, they're going nowhere. They are not moving from that 3-bedroom house and a flat. And I know people can be proactive themselves in trying to get swaps, etc. But I do think it would take an in-depth piece of work, and this can only be done by the Housing Executive, that a survey is carried out as to how many properties and how many people are there. Even a survey on the actual transfer list now as it stands to start off with, to see if anything could be done in the short term, so that Housing Executive can be more proactive in maybe getting people into the homes that they want to live in. So I hope that the Housing Executive will take that on board. I know you mentioned, you know, building homes, but I think we should get into the more speak of building communities. And I know the Housing Association and the Housing Executive and the Housing Association cannot do this by themselves. They need to be talking to roads. They need to be talking to the, you know, education. They need to be talking to all the communities where all the community infrastructure is there, because there is no good building up hundreds and hundreds of houses if we haven't got the infrastructure there for those people to avail of and help make their new area and a good community where they want to live and, you know, raise their family, etc., etc. So I think it needs to be just more than building homes. Another thing that I do think is very topical at the minute, and it's adaptations. Look, we did have a commitment last year, and her name does. I'm not going to idolize anybody anyway, but we did have a meeting with a person who was going to try and move the time waiting on people for adaptations, that it has shortened. However, I do not believe that has happened yet, and I know every councillor will probably have many stories of what has happened there, individual constituents regarding adaptations and the stress that it has caused, and you know, they have been put off many times, from their debts has been postponed, etc., and then when they go on site, there's dollar fines and all that can hold up work too as well. And I do think that we need to tighten up on the time from a person when they first apply for an adaptation until it is fulfilled. I know that coming down the line in these newer Home for Life schemes, that all that will be made easier. However, we still have a big problem with that, with older existing stock And I know it's not just the housing executive that are part of that. There's consultants, there's the, you know, the KISS scheme workers and all of that. So it needs to be a collective, proactive approach to try and get adaptations time from when they're applied for until they are built. We need to get that more streamlined. And I think there's just a few other things that I want to touch on. And I suppose
If I could, Councillor Logue, if I could you sort of bring your remarks.
I certainly will.
conclusion. Thank you.
I'll just mention them and I'll not go into detail. But I suppose place shaping, there's a lot of current older estates that need improvement for today's standard of living, and I'm talking about people having cars, etc., etc. There's a lot of older estates that's not fit for disabled people, and I know that's not just for the housing executive responsibility, but if a piece of work could be done around that, that we're not just focused on building newer estates, but also taking into account what our older estates look like too. And I think I do have to mention this, the service charge for people who were able to buy housing executive flats, apartments, etc. The service charge has risen by near 300%. Now, I think, and that's in 1 year, and that was without any consultation at all to the homeowners. Now, we all know that the climate that we're living in, and that was a big, big shock for people whose service charge jumped. Now, I'm trying to get to the bottom of that, exactly where all that come from. But I do think the lack of consultation with those homeowners, you know, I just don't think it was the right thing to do, given the amount. It did go from over £200 to over £700 in my estimates. I think that's either 300% or near enough anyway. So I think that's all for now. Probably missed a few things, but I'll be talking to you again in the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Logue. The next indicated speaker there is Councillor Doyle.
Thanks, Chair. And I just want to put on record again, same as most, that we have a fantastic team here in Derry and Strabane by Eddie. I'm on the phone or by email to staff most days, as I'm sure most of us are, and the service they provide the people in this city and district's fantastic. Two very pressing questions. I've raised this before with you, Grania, with regards to people outside of the district being moved into the district as a result of the homelessness change as part of the reset plan for during COVID. Do we have a definitive date when, for example, we will be able to say the reset plan is now defunct, and the people who, some of whom, a minority of whom, who have caused difficulties in some areas, who have been moved to Derry to then cause difficulties here, won't be anymore? And the second part that I was quite worried about was when I was looking under your report there on page 49, the homelessness allocations that have been made. Less than a fifth of those now at this point seem to be single let tenancies, or I suppose houses of some description. The rest seem to be hotels or hostels. Are we facing a crisis in terms of temporary accommodation for people? Because naturally we don't want to ever have to put people in B&Bs or hotels, but it seems that it's less than 19% of the total that have been allocated to I suppose you would say almost bricks and mortar housing. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. The next speaker is Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Grania, and all of the team there. Like others, I add my thanks to staff, and I particularly mention the patch managers. You know, who are they're there on the ground, and they're the ones what many of us would have first contact, and really appreciate what they're doing. Second page in your slide, community planning, strength of partnership working. Very interesting. I don't see anything rural in there. All I see is mix of residential living within Derry, Londonderry City Centre, sustainable city centre living, etc. Where is the rural element of the community planning? And I say that coming off the back of having attended the 30th anniversary of the Rural Housing Association yesterday. John McMullen was there from the Housing Executive, and some extremely interesting remarks from a person you'll probably know quite well, Mark Conway, who's very strong on rural housing. And I would love to know what Mark would make of what we have in front of us here, because I'm disappointed, to be very, very honest with you. The third slide there, the green element, is investment in new build. If we move on through and find the one which I'll find it yet. Oh, there it is there. The number of houses. If you compare urban to rural, the target, SG target, was 1929, 1861 urban, 68 rural. Now the achievement was better admittedly, but still falls far short of the actual makeup demography of this council area. The majority area of the council is rural. The population, you're talking around about roughly circa 60, circa about a third of our population would be rural. Where is that reflected in this compared to your opening statement? You talk about retrofitting and energy efficiency, investing in existing stock, fuel poverty and inequalities, prioritizing sustainability, boiler replacement, etc. Of course, using fossil fuels in those. But I've just learned that the executive no longer repairs roofing panels. The roof panels that you put on, should they be solar, should they be water heating, those were put on by the housing executive on their clients' properties. When they break down, they're just switched off and left there. They're not fixed. Is that policy? How does that compare with the statement of prioritizing sustainability? That issue I brought to our council last Thursday, and I trust that our housing council member actually said he would bring that to the housing council. I presume it was brought to the housing council. So it's something that I would expect we'd be getting answers on, because it doesn't match what you're saying about prioritizing sustainability. Surely there's prioritization in certain areas, but why not have renewable energy being prioritized as well within all of that? So as I say, my concerns are that issue, specific issue, with regard to the replacement of the units that housing executives themselves put in on their clients' properties, which are just sitting there now turned off if they've broken down, and the inadequate attention to rural housing. As I say, I thank those officers on the ground that we deal with, but I'm looking at the bigger picture here on issues that concern many of us in the rural area. Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Hussey. I'm just going to take one more and then I'll let Gráinne and that respond. Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And on behalf of the DEP, can I just welcome Gráinne, Eddie and Louise here, and thank Gráinne for the presentation. And first of all, I just want to put on record our thanks to the staff that work in the Londonderry offices and the Strabane offices for the work that they do. Look, I'd also like to welcome that £97 million investment across the council area. Very, very welcome. But, at the end of the day, it's not enough, because when we look at the waiting list, it is a dire and worrying situation out there for those looking to get houses. An issue that was raised earlier on in regarding to, doing an evaluation of those, maybe somebody, a single person living in a 4-bedroom house. The problem being, I have no problem with that there, but the problem being is we do not have enough 1-beds and 2-beds to move that sort of a tenant onto if they wanted to move or downsize. And I understand the difficulty in around that. And look, I think, Gráinne, you mentioned as well a number of private tenancies. are leaving that 40 now and probably coming to the housing executive. Would that be because of rent raises, or or even rent raises, and the housing benefit doesn't cover the full amount for the rent on a private? Because I've always heard, that, and I'm only using this figure, that if housing executive pay £80 per week or whatever it is, and the rent is 20, that the tenant has to pay that 20, and with the increases and the cost of living crisis now, that £20 isn't available anymore. I'm just wondering, is that a problem? And around the boiler replacement and stuff like that there, I do have concerns, and around the gas at the minute, because everyone is afraid of gas at the moment because of the spiralling cost. And I'm just wondering, Grania, what has been done to look at future proofing and around that there with new builds and around renewable energy and better installation and less heat loss and stuff like that there. What is going on and around that? And I think you have answered the issue and around the contractual problems that we have read about. 11 of the 13 contracts had pulled out. And I'm just wondering, were those maintenance contracts, Grania? And for our council area, you talked that there is ongoing discussions. Have we those contractual discussions sorted out for across our council area? And just like the previous speaker, I just want to, mention as well, and around the number of new builds within rural areas compared to urban. And it has always been an ongoing issue, but I do believe that this is an issue needs to be looked at seriously and around. And look, for us in that rural area, for us who are rural councillors, we want to sustain our communities within our rural settings, to keep our shops going, our churches going, and our football clubs and other sporting bodies going. Because if a house isn't available for somebody in a rural setting and they want to stay there, and there's no other option for them, they have to move into a very much an urban setting, probably against their will, but needs matters most at the end of the day. But I do think that is something that needs to be looked at. But that's all I would have to say. But once again, thank you for coming in and giving the presentation. And once again, thanks to the staff on the ground who are doing their best in sometimes very, very difficult and challenging climates. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. Grania and your team, I'll hand over for those round of questions.
Thank you. And I suppose just to say, it's always, as Chief Executive, it's always wonderful to hear colleagues being praised. So thank you for that. And in particular, I'm sure my colleagues on the call will understand me saying this. In particular, patch managers, I agree with the point. They are so important to the organisation and to tenants. I mean, they're for most tenants, they are the person they know best, and I suppose really important that we thank our patch managers. So I appreciate those comments. We'll cover all of those questions. I'll touch on them and I'll bring colleagues in as well. I mean, I think there's a general theme here around new build and housing need. And, I think we are very, very clear in the Housing Executive that everything we can possibly do as the Housing Authority to get additional social housing built, we will do. We are not in a position currently that we can build. We hope to be in the future. So our role as a Commissioner of Social Housing and as a place shaper is where we essentially pull every lever we possibly can, and working in partnership with you to do that. And I think in terms of the urban rural split, I mean, I covered a lot of ground in a short space of time, but just in terms of that second slide, I did specifically mention rural when I presented for that reason. And I understand, Councillor Hussey, the points you make. Where we've been focused, we have a very clear plan on rural housing, a strategy that we launched this year. And the team are very focused on working with housing associations to identify as many sites as we possibly can, to encourage housing associations to bring them forward in our commissioning prospectus. I think Louise set out some of the ways in which we're doing that. There are specific and unique challenges associated with rural housing, but I suppose just to give you that reassurance, we are absolutely and consider it a priority, and it is a priority, and something the board of the Housing Executive is very clear about, that rural housing is central to the sustainability of communities. It's central to, I think COVID has taught us a lot about how their expectations have changed and where people want to live, and to the vibrancy of communities. So we don't we give equivalence in terms of our focus between rural and urban, but I fully accept that when you look at the numbers, it doesn't always appear that way. But just to be very clear, in terms of our priority, our rural strategy is very, very clear. That everything that we can do to work with housing associations to bring land forward, and indeed we're working very closely with public sector partners to identify sites. And I'll ask Louise to come in a moment just to talk a little bit about some of the successes we've had locally in relation to that. I suppose on the point about adaptations and the work that we're doing, and in relation to adaptations and reducing down the time that customers have to wait from the initial application right through. I mean, there's no question that that has been impacted by a number of things, including availability and accessibility of occupational therapists, including ongoing issues in relation to getting work done and the costs associated with work done. We've applied uplifts in terms of our own grants programs this year where we can, but the overall challenges associated with adaptations are quite similar to the challenges that we're seeing elsewhere. But we are consistently looking, in fact, with the Minister today talking about the issue of adaptations and consistently looking at ways in which we can reduce the time. Since the meeting last year, we had a number of meetings actually, because a number of you had asked us about adaptations, and we and set out clearly in terms of adaptations to housing executive stock. I know the Director of Asset Management went to visit a number of properties to look at and ensure that we're identifying defects and remedial works are completed and so on, and set out clearly how we do that. So, but we can, as I say, we can continue to press on those issues. I'm going to ask my colleague Andy just to come in the point in relation to solar panels in a moment, Andy, in relation to that issue. But if I might just hand over to Louise in the first instance, just to talk a little bit more, or indeed anyone else, Louise, that you'd suggest in relation to the issue of rural housing and bringing sites forward.
Okay, thank you, Gráinne. Could I just go back to one of the questions that Patricia raised there, just in relation to building communities, and one of the things that I would add is that that we provide the support letters for housing associations to develop all their schemes. Everything that's on the social housing development programme, it comes across my desk, and it's me that signs the support letters. And those support letters include a housing mix that we endeavour to make what we call a sustainable mix on all of the developments. It's quite difficult to maintain that though when there's such a significant number of small families and singles who are on our waiting list, which then drives us to support unfortunately high levels of single units. And we try to take a measured approach to doing that, and take on board the local area, and take on board some of the comments from our local staff and from housing association, housing management teams about how difficult some of those estates are to manage. Those estates are developed in line with planning policies, and one of the things that I would also say is that they're designed in order not just to have a sustainable mix, but for mixes that include a provision for people with disabilities. 10% of new developments have wheelchair properties, or sorry, 10% of the units on new developments have wheelchair properties. So going forward, and for those schemes on the ground, you will see sort of a significant increase in the number of wheelchair and adapted properties that we have available. Councillor Hussey, or Alderman Hussey, mentioned community planning there, and where does rural fit into that piece of work that we're doing in relation to the scoping exercise across Derry City Centre. What I would say there is, in place shaping, we do take the needs of rural areas very, very seriously. That particular action is driven by the wording of the action that's aligned to ourselves within the strategic growth plan for Derry, which is looking at the opportunity sites within the city centre in particular. And we did carry out a significant site identification study a few years ago, just looking for opportunity sites. So that's why it's focused on Derry, but I can assure Alderman Hussey that our site identification programme does extend to rural areas as well. This year we've already carried out site identification studies in Claudy, Eglinton. We're programmed to carry out one in Sion Mills, Ballinagorry, just to name a few. And some of those exercises have been completed by our place shaper who's online there, Sean McGettigan, and they have been issued to a number of housing associations to take those the sites identified potentially forward for social housing. So yeah, we do take the needs in rural areas very, very seriously. The other thing that I would mention is just going back to Derry and looking at housing need, and you know, that action under the community plan is very specific to Derry. The follow-up action to our scoping exercise has been a recognition that the pressure on housing in Derry isn't just about social housing. Our strategic housing market analysis identified need across the different sectors in Derry. It also looked at demographic trends. Our population isn't growing massively. However, the number of households is increasing because the size of households is reducing. So we have a bigger need for smaller accommodation, not just in social housing, but across private sector accommodation as well. We're also conscious that there are demands on temporary accommodation, but that's not just from people presenting to Eddie's office. We have become aware of approaches from the University of Ulster and from a range of other organisations such as Health and Social Care around pressures that they're experiencing in the private sector to try and accommodate people coming into the town, even for short-term stays and for longer term people to live here. So the workshop we had that Grania referenced earlier last week, which was chaired by a member of council staff, Karen Phillips, and myself, tried to start that negotiation, try to start or open those discussions with our partners around, can we try and sort of map what we're saying are the pressures, what are the needs, what are the types of accommodation and locations that we're looking at. So we're planning to bring together that group again. I mean, Eddie presented from his neck of the woods as well, and very interesting information coming from him, but that's only part of the picture. So we're now asking our other partners to come with those statistical information around need and tell us what they're doing to try and address those particular needs, and then we can determine what the gaps are. And that's a very significant mapping exercise that we are now undertaking over the next 6 weeks or so.
Maybe if I come in now, just in response to Grania, I'll address not only the solar panels, if you don't mind, I'll also address the heating query from Alderman Devaney as well. Alderman Hussey, I assume you're probably referring to solar panels were installed maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. We installed about 1,000 across Northern Ireland. What I would suggest, if you could put addresses through to Eddie in the local office, and we'll have a look at that. I'll talk to the unit who actually set that scheme up, and we'll look at the maintenance responsibilities and how they should be addressed. I'm not aware that there was a specific problem, but as I say, if you can pass the addresses on, we'll certainly have a look at that. Alderman Devaney, yeah, in terms of heating, as Grania said earlier on, we are committed to future retrofitting of our stock. With regard to the heating systems themselves, our intention would be to eventually phase out carbon-based heating systems in our stock. At the minute, we're looking at a number of pilot schemes. We're looking at air source heat pumps. We're looking at ground source heat pumps. We're looking at battery storage. Obviously, we'll be looking to the Department for the Economy and their energy strategy. And I'm sure you'll have heard there's discussions about using hydrogen in the gas supply infrastructure. So we are looking at all these alternatives to carbon-based heating. There are issues with a lot of them at the minute. There are issues with the supply. There's the issue with cost. And I would have to say as well, maintenance. If we were to swap over to 84,000 ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps tomorrow, we're not altogether sure there'll be the number of trained people in the industry who will be able to maintain those. So there are all those sorts of issues that Grania spoke about earlier about skilling up the sector to be able to support us in what we want to do to our stock. But I can assure you we are looking at alternatives for the future. And much of that phasing will depend on the level of funding, as again, that Grania has referred to.
Thanks, Andy. If I just very briefly touch on the two issues in relation to temporary accommodation. And again, just to be very clear, and I think the numbers speak for themselves, you know, there is a significant challenge across across Northern Ireland in relation to the availability of temporary accommodation. And that has happened because we have had 3 years of growing demand for temporary accommodation. And it has been a year-on-year growth in demand. In fact, almost entirely a quarter-by-quarter growth in demand. There's been very, very little let up. And we have, I mean, it was far more than a year ago, I was concerned that we'd run out of any contingency in terms of temporary accommodation. So that has led us to in some cases using hotel and bed and breakfast accommodation. We will only do it where we absolutely have to, and we will only make out of area placements where we absolutely have to. I can't give a commitment that would end anytime soon, because we're seeing the numbers coming forward and continued growth in demand for temporary accommodation as more and more people present. And so it remains the case that the kind of challenges that we face as the housing executive in accessing temporary accommodation can only be relieved when we are in a position, I think, to undertake long-term leases with multi-year funding, where we have a ready supply of temporary accommodation, of high quality temporary accommodation. That's where we want to get to. That's my ask, I suppose, in terms of where we go forward in the future. But there's no doubt from my point of view that the availability of temporary accommodation, and it's not unique to this council area, it is very much across all council areas, but the lack of availability is as bad as I've seen it, and we have a huge challenge ahead. I'm going to ask Eddie or indeed Frank there just to cover the issue of leaseholders and service charges, Chair, and then I think we've covered all those questions. Thank you.
In terms of the service charges for some flats, our model is one of cost recovery. So each individual block of flats has an individual cost account as to how much we've spent maintaining the walls, the roofs, the windows, and so on. So it can happen if we carry out a scheme to a block of flats, the service charges for that block of flats will increase quite dramatically until we have recovered the costs. So it isn't that we increase service charges across the board by 300%, but you will find individual blocks where, for example, there may be a roofing scheme or something that the cost will go up quite considerably. The details of how we calculate the service charges are set out in the lease, but we do know that a lot of people don't read the details of their lease in detail, but we have a specialist leasehold unit which will communicate with individual leaseholders and explain to them what their calculation is and how we arrived at it. But it's not a revenue generating process, it is a cost recovery process.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks for that. I've got three further indicated speakers, and if I could ask when I'm calling you just to be a wee bit brief to give them time to respond. So Councillor Harkin.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you to everybody from the Housing Executive that has made the time to come in here today. And the presentations have been very, very useful. And on behalf of People Before Profit, we want to thank everybody at the Housing Executive for the work they do day in, day out. And we're well aware of the pressures that are on to keep the Housing Executive and its and all the stock up and running. Looking at the statistics in the report, once again, it's very, very depressing. Despite all the efforts of everybody, it's depressing that there's so many people on the waiting list. And I suppose I'm going to ask these questions quick. Is Stormont being down having any impact on our ability to see more houses built or to have more houses put in the pipeline? That would be useful to know if there's blockages there, because we have to look at all the angles here in terms of what conversations need to be had. The second one is really in response to Grania about Firmus. I mean, look, I'll be honest, I wouldn't be able to encourage a constituent right now to go with Firmus Energy. I mean, the issue there is that once people switch over to gas and Firmus, that's the only supplier. With oil, there's multiple suppliers. And I think right now, I mean, Firmus is a company that's making massive profits, while many housing executive residents will be struggling to pay their bills. They've just announced a 56% increase on Saturday or this weekend. That's going to push a lot of people over the edge. And you know, they've refused now to come into this council to talk about this latest raft of increases. They've refused our call for them to put their profits into a hardship fund that the council has set up. This is not a company that is struggling, but a lot of the people who are using Firmus are. So I hear what you're saying in terms of efficiency, but I would have a lot of difficulty telling someone right now, now's the time to make the switch. I just think that, you know, there's no knowing how much profiteering these companies are willing to engage in over the next year. And then the third one is there's obviously a strike by maintenance workers right now at the housing executive, and I want to know what impact that is having on the delivery of services. I mean, I've been down to the picket line speaking to the workers. They're a bit frustrated that they're trying to get a cost of living pay increase, and they've seen contractors get a 30% increase when they walked away from their contracts. And I'm sure you can all agree that all workers right now need a cost of living pay increase. I'm well aware of the financial pressures on the housing executive. Is this something that the DFC minister needs to intervene on and help the housing executive figure out how to make sure our workers, our housing executive workers, are getting a fair pay raise? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. Councillor Donnelly.
Good, Chair, and thank you, and thanks to the housing executive. A lot of the points that I was going to make, excuse me, have been made, but I'll just, you know, but I think there's an important one, and Councillor Harkin has just made it. You know, the housing executive have, you know, a duty of care to the tenants, but they also have a duty of care to workers. And in my experience with workers in the housing executive has been completely positive. You know, and there's a big difference between housing executive and the ethos and some of those in housing associations. So, you know, and I think workers deserve the proper pay and working conditions. And, you know, again, Councillor Harkin has pointed out that some outsourced work can get up to 20 or 30% increase, but there's a paltry 1.75%. So I would encourage Grania to engage directly with the union and ensure that, you know, the workers get proper pay and this doesn't have an impact on tenants. The other point that I would want to make is regarding adaptations. You know, there's some cases that I've been dealing with where, you know, despite going with a lot of builders won't take these on now at the minute, but, you know, there was one case recently where the lowest price from the builder was still several £1,000s above what the grant was offering. And, you know, that adds to the stress. And at one stage, you know, the lady in question was just going to cancel it, but she ended up with several £1,000s in debt in order to make sure that adaptation took place. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Final speaker is Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Chair, and a big thanks to everybody from the housing executive today. And like others, a lot of my questions have been answered. But just a few broad points in relation to the housing waiting list and the number of homes that are being built year on year. I think we can all accept that that the current trajectory isn't working. There needs to be a step change in terms of delivery of social homes, and the ability of the housing executive to step in to provide those homes could be that game change and that step change that we need. Just in relation to that, because it was Louise that sort of touched on it, that there's a lot of complexities in terms of delivering social homes, and one of the key elements and components of that is land availability. And I just want to thank everybody from the housing executive for their input to our local development plan, and hopefully by
by that partnership approach between yourselves and council, we'll see more opportunities being created for social homes as the development plans rolled out. So hopefully we see progress in that in the coming months. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody from the Housing Executive who had an input to our local development plan. In relation to the energy efficient homes, and there's and it's very hard to disagree with a lot of the points that have been made. But see whenever we're talking about advising tenants, they have more energy efficient homes, more efficient boilers, they and they have less reliance on fossil fuels, so you're burning less fuel to keep the same standard of heat within your home. I know from speaking to quite a lot of people that there's very simple measures. Particularly, I know I was speaking to one girl today who was waiting 3 months for for work to be carried on out on her front door. The front door is all fitting. There's a draft coming in. No, she just can't keep the house warm, no matter how efficient their boiler is. If those simple ongoing response maintenance isn't carried out in a timely manner, there's no amount of energy efficiency that could be that could keep that house warm. So there is a real importance in relation to response maintenance, and it highlights the fact that when we do have housing executive staff that are on strike for fair pay, then no, that needs to be a priority, and I've no doubt that it is from yourselves, but it does need to be a priority because in terms of maintenance work and ensuring that the energy efficiency of homes, that can't be stressed enough. But on the point of energy efficiency, and I know Councillor Mooney raised the Waterside Triangle, and thank him for doing that, and I want to thank Eddie as well for the ongoing engagement in relation to the Triangle scheme. But all the residents in the Triangle, and that's impacted by that scheme, or impacted by the delays in that scheme, they're all very concerned. They're not concerned about the energy efficiency because it's not even entering their mind. They're facing a winter now again, where there's water going to be run down their walls. They're already living in damp properties where it's almost impossible to maintain any level of heat. And there's and I know quite a lot of them are ringing me in very distressed states. I know they've been in contact with yourself, Eddie, and housing executive staff, but whilst the rest of the world is facing an energy crisis, they're facing the same problems, and that they've always faced, in terms of no matter what there is, it's impossible for me to keep my house warm, and all they want is they have a home that is free from damp and free from water, and that there's no danger of a ceiling collapsing. So this scheme is much needed, and I know it was about 3 weeks ago the business case was approved by the department, the revised business case, and I've been comforted by any conversations I've been having with housing executive staff around the importance of this scheme, and how it's a priority locally. But I would plead and request that there is that level of urgency in terms of consulting with elected reps, but most importantly, consulting with the tenants and the leaseholders of the properties that are impacted. So I would very much welcome that discussion that Eddie was referring to, but I think the most important consultation in all of this is the consultation with the residents. Just picking up very briefly, Chair, on on the issue of housing need, and I know, Eddie, I've had conversations with you in the past around pockets of dereliction in parts of the Waterside, particularly in streets that are coming off Spencer Road. Like there's growing dereliction in Barnwell, Moore Street, Gordfoyle Place, and as you move up towards Dungiven Road, Violet Street, and Primrose Street, there's and I know in the past we talked about a potential scheme, given its location within the city centre. Is there any development on that? Is there anything that we can do to try and advance that? Because whilst we've got a housing crisis, and we're looking towards opportunities for they deliver social housing, we can't ignore the fact that there is a significant number of properties that are derelict, and they've been derelict for decades. So if there's any way that we can bring those back into use, it would go at least some way to providing homes for the thousands of people that are on the waiting list. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Grania, I'm acutely aware of the time, but I'll just pass back to you there in terms of response.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all of those questions. I think probably to focus maybe on those three areas. I think the biggest impact for us right now, in terms of in terms of the Northern Ireland Executive and the Assembly, is the fact that we are working with an indicative budget. That indicative budget means, as of today, we can spend up to 65% of the budget, which was baselined last year. So that obviously makes it very, very difficult for us to plan for the future. And I think that's, without question, having an impact on some of our services, including homelessness services. We are working as effectively as we can, and I'm extremely grateful to our partners in the voluntary community sector and our other partners who understand, I think, the difficulties associated with that. But that is for now the significant impact that on a daily basis that we face. I wanted to just come back to the points around two significant points in relation to contracts and contractors and industrial action. In terms of the contractors, and just to be really, really clear, because it was mentioned in the previous set of questions as well, is that the contracts that we've had disputes over, and they are in the minority, by the way. We have 130 contracts that we manage as an organisation that spends 1.2 billion, and the disputes that we have had with contractors have been in the single figures. The CTO 55, which is the planned maintenance, so to answer your question, Councillor, it was a planned maintenance contract, and that's probably the one that's had the most press attention. Just to be very clear, we went to tender on that contract, and 13 organisations successfully submitted tenders. Unfortunately, one contractor went into administration last year, which led to us working with others. Just to say there was press attention that said that those 11 contractors pulled out. That's not the case. They are still in contract. The vast majority are still in contract, and we continue to work with them to seek a resolution. So if we can, within the confines of their contract, if they can provide compelling evidence of material cost increases, and in some cases labour cost increases, we will work as hard as we can to apply where we can, using the evidence that's available to us, to apply cost uplifts. Because our job here, as I said at the start, is we want to spend as much as we can, as effectively and as sustainably as we can on our tenants' homes to keep them safe, warm and dry. It's never been more important this winter. So we are being as pragmatic as possible within the confines of procurement law, and we cannot simply we have to act within the terms of the contracts and procurement law. But I think we've had useful and pragmatic conversations of late with contractors, and we are being hopefully, and I'm sure it is absolutely the case, our teams on the ground are keeping everyone informed on where those are at, and as I've said to colleagues internally, when we know, you will know, in other words, where we've made progress, and we can ensure we can move those contracts forward. We will. So just to give you that reassurance, we are still very much in the vast majority of cases engaged in negotiations with those contractors, and we hope to make significant progress as we go forward in the next few weeks in the interest of tenants. And this is all down to, obviously economic headwinds. I don't think any of us would have expected inflation to be where it's at. And that brings us on to the issue of industrial action, because we deliver our programs in two ways. We deliver them either through our contracts with our contractors, or through our DLO, for example. The housing executive, as you know, has 3,200 staff. We have a particular industrial dispute strike action ongoing, and so we have just under 200 staff currently on strike, and I have been engaged directly with and through my colleagues in relation to trying to resolve that, and that's our hope and our aim is to resolve. I actually have a meeting tomorrow with trade union colleagues, and what we're trying to do is to ensure that we are getting that balance right, as you've all said, between ensuring that we are paying a fair wage to all of our colleagues. I think today's meeting is an example of that. We can't do the work that we do, and we can't serve our tenants without the brilliant people in our organisation. And I have to strike the right balance between that salary and what we invest in our tenants' homes. But just to be clear, the industrial dispute that's ongoing with Unite is in relation to last year's pay settlement, which was a nationally agreed pay agreement. So I have no discretion in that. That is through the national employers as agreed, and we applied that and we paid it in full. And so the conversation and the focus of our attention right now is this year's national pay award, which is out to consultation, and if agreed, would apply for the lowest paid staff across the organisation a 10% increase. And so the conversations that we're currently having with union colleagues are to apply that national award, assuming the consultation is concluded and the unions agree to it. Then our role as an employer is to implement that, and what I have to do with my colleagues in our finance teams is figure out how we're going to pay for that. But that will be if agreed, that will be put in place. And I hope we're in a position that we'll be able to resolve the strike action and move forward. So just to be very clear, as I say, the focus of our attention is on that award, that nationally agreed pay award, of which I have no discretion, and also any other way in which we can be a flexible and a fair employer. We are looking at, including a range of other terms that I will be speaking to colleagues tomorrow about. And I suppose the final point, Councillor Jackson made a number of points, but I think it kind of brings home to me the importance of that long-term, meeting that long-term investment requirement within the housing executive, which we have talked about in previous meetings. The importance of enabling us to borrow sustainably and appropriately in order to invest in our stock, and that investment requirement is very large over a 30-year period. And I absolutely take the point that actually the real solution to keeping tenants safe, warm and dry is taking a fabric first approach to our properties, and ensuring that the properties themselves are as well maintained as we possibly can. And that's really, that's everything that we do as a landlord. That is, our bread and butter. And we hope, if we're in a position that we can borrow in order to build and in order to invest in our stock, then that's where we want to get to. And we've, a lot of work to do to retrofit our homes. But I hope and look forward to hopefully in the coming years being in a position that we're able to set out, how we'll do that, the way in which we will borrow, the sustainable way in which we will borrow, and an investment plan to do that. So, Chair, thank you for that, and thank you for all the questions.
Thank you, Grania, and thank you to Eddie, Louise, and your entire team across the City and District. I think it's been mentioned on a few occasions how good the work is that you do, despite the challenges, and they overcome those. So thank you. That'll bring that wee section of our meeting to a close. So if you want to stay, you can. If you don't, you can sign off. It's entirely up to yourselves. And it's streamed online as well. So all right, thank yous.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
So that moves us on then. Members, we'll move on to item 6, which is Chair's business. I have 2 items. I have one that I want to raise myself, and Councillor Farrell has also contacted me in relation to another item. The one I want to raise myself sort of flagged up last night. It was the announcement by TransLink that they had intended to do line works to the rail line leading into Derry over the Halloween weekend. Rightly, there was outrage across the social media world, and then obviously it was on the radio this morning and this afternoon as well. I know that a number of representatives had made representations to TransLink to postpone that decision, and thankfully that has prevailed. And well, the train lines will be open for the Halloween weekend. However, I do think that it's representative of a view that TransLink don't look at Derry in the way that they look at Belfast. And I think that's something that needs to be on record from this council, that we're not in agreement with, that the Halloween weekend particularly, or any weekend, that Derry is open for business, that Derry is somewhere that people should be able to come via train or bus or whatever other method they want to. But I wanted to put that on record, that we are, whilst we appreciate the work needs to happen, that we're glad to see that the decision has been postponed to do that work, but it needs to be recognised that we are open for business. Councillor Heaney, are we looking to come on that?
Thanks, Chair, and I concur with what he said, and particularly in relation to it's just been symptomatic of an approach from TransLink, and to that effect, I'm going to make a proposal which I had sent Andy Nulla earlier, so hopefully she can put that up on the screen. And I'd ask for a seconder when it does.
Well, are you able to confirm just that you received the proposal from Councillor Heaney? Yep.
Chair, can I second that, Councillor Fleming?
Yep.
There we go. Speak to that, Chair, just briefly.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, well, just as I was saying, like this is just the latest example of what seems to be a mindset in TransLink that sees the Derry line as a branch of a Coleraine to Belfast service. There are all sorts of ongoing issues that need to be resolved in relation to the likes of the Sunday service. We obviously had the debacle over the train to the Derry match, which left from Belfast. So there's an issue there, and I think it would be useful that members have an opportunity to question TransLink on this, and hopefully get some of those issues resolved in terms of timetabling and the approach that, and get assurance that the Derry won't be viewed as almost a branch line to a service to Coleraine. So that's all I have to say, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Heaney, and that's been seconded by Councillor Fleming. Councillor Harkin, are you looking to speak?
Yeah, Chair, thank you for raising this issue. I mean, I do think it is important that the Council sends a very strong message to TransLink that this treatment of Derry is completely unacceptable. As Councillor Heaney said, this is the second time in just a matter of months where TransLink has treated Derry with a lot of disrespect. That they effectively cut us off on a crucial weekend, the Halloween weekend, which is so huge in Derry. Makes absolutely no sense. And this is Belfast officials that don't seem to understand that Derry is one of the biggest cities in this island and needs to be treated that way. There was absolute outrage over what they did for the train service for the All-Ireland final. And that should have woke them up, but it clearly hasn't. They've done it again, and it's only been because there's been uproar and outrage that they've shifted this, and I'm glad that they have. but this sort of treatment has to end. It's just not good enough. And look, you know, there's a discussion this week about the election count centre being moved to Lisburn. We lost the election office to Belfast over and over again. You know, Derry gets done down, and this needs to change. And you know, I think we have to have that direct discussion with TransLink. So we will very much support this proposal. And there'll be a lot of issues to raise with TransLink. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. Councillor Minnie.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Heaney for bringing this motion on the back of what transpired over the last day. I heard back today at lunchtime, and Sinead McLaughlin, MLA, was on along with Steve Bradley from Under the West, and apparently one of the reasons given was that the work was to be done on the line because it may have been half term in Belfast, and it was half term in Belfast, but one of the biggest festivals in the island of Ireland happened at the same time. The thinking is just bizarre, to say the least. Yeah, but apart from that, anyway, but it's symptomatic, I think, of what's happening. And I'm thinking, you know, maybe from Belfast as to what's happening in the northwest and further afield. And, you know, this will be timely, and we would definitely welcome the Chief Executive of TransLink to come in and discuss this in full. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Minnie. Councillor Doyle.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me on that a member of committee. And no, absolutely behind Connor's proposal, because not only has this been a sideshow of what and a demonstration to many of our constituents what TransLink think of our Halloween celebrations and the city in general, but over the last number of weeks in particular, I've been contacted by I don't know how many people who have, because of the lack of urgency on repairing signals, have had to either come from Belfast, try to get home, and be stopped in Coleraine and have to get buses. And it's been going on for weeks and weeks. Not only to people who live in Derry but maybe work in Coleraine or elsewhere, but also to visiting business people who've been in contact with me recently about it. It's an absolute disgrace. I mean, what we're effectively, and I think Sean said it there, we're being systematically cut off from the rest of the north, and it seems to be at a whim. So I really do welcome the proposal, because I certainly have a lot of issues that I want to raise with TransLink going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. That proposal has been proposed and seconded, so I haven't seen anybody speak against it, so we'll take it as passed in terms of that item. And the second item for Chair's business, if Councillor Farrell has contacted me, so far away.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just want to reflect on the good news, which is the relocation of health sciences from Jordanstown to Magee. Last month saw the influx of approximately 900 students who are going to be studying radiography, radiotherapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy right here in Derry, and that's going to complement the existing health courses that we've got at Magee, the School of Medicine, the School of Nursing, the North's first paramedic science degree. So there's going to be a health cluster here in the Northwest. That's good news, and that's something that should definitely be welcomed. But, and there's always a but the promise of wider expansion has yet to be fulfilled. It has been 999 days since the New Decade, New Approach agreement says that university expansion proposals would be produced. And 999 days later, we have nothing. We have no expansion plans. We're actually no closer to 10,000 students than we were in 2015, and that's 7 years ago. We have invited the Economy Minister here on numerous occasions to discuss those plans, to discuss the way forward with the university, and he has declined our invitation. He has not come before the special council meeting. So I think it's timely, given this milestone of 999 days, that we reissue that invitation to the Economy Minister. because I think it's important that we as elected members have a good understanding of progress towards this really, really important piece in the jigsaw of Derry's development, which has 10,000 students at McGee. So I think that invitation should be reissued, and I would like a seconder.
Councillor Boyle seconded that proposal, and I would be in full agreement with that. So we're happy to resend that invitation. Thank you for raising that issue, Councillor Farrell. There's no other indicated speakers on it, so we'll just move on to item 7, which is matters arising from the open minutes of the Governance and Strategic Planning Committee, which was held on Tuesday, the 6th of September. Pages 170, 132. I'll just give it a wee minute if anybody has any matters arising. Councillor Harkin, do you want to go ahead there?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And this is in relation to the Hardship Fund. And first of all, I want to commend everybody in Derry and in Belfast and in Omagh that joined the cost of living protests over the weekend. I think that those protests were bigger, they're angrier, and it's very clear that growing numbers of people are prepared to take to the streets. And there was also a huge strike over the weekend as well by Royal Mail, 115,000 workers, and the Derry picket line, as people can imagine, was very, very strong. I'm glad to see that the Tories were forced to back down and retreat on their flagship proposal in the last budget, which was to slash the taxes of the super rich. And there's no doubt that is because of, in part, because of these protests that are happening here and are happening across the water. So there needs to be more, and they need to be bigger. But I want to raise the issue of the Hardship Fund because obviously the decision of the council to start the Hardship Fund got a lot of coverage over the weekend. And as the original proposers of the Hardship Fund, we welcome the fact that there will be a Hardship Fund. But there's already an issue here. As we know, Firmus increased their prices by more than 50% this weekend. I've already spoken to advice providers who say that their phones are already very busy with people asking how to access the council fund. And I'm not sure how much of a discussion we've had with the advice providers about that work, even though we've agreed to put some money aside to help them do that. So this is a concern because their capacity is already quite great in terms of the work that they've been doing. The second thing I want to raise is, look, I'll be honest, I was stunned at the comments of the SDLP representatives and Sinn Féin representatives on the radio. I heard from them things like, we are leading from the front. We are doing everything we can to help people in this district. This is the most of this money is coming from councillors' wages that we didn't take. None of this is true. As people will remember very clearly, Sinn Féin and the SDLP were the two parties who immediately tried to block this proposal at the start when we proposed £3 million go to the Hardship Fund, and they weren't proposing less. They were trying to stop the proposal. So to now be claiming that you're leading from the front, I just thought was utter opportunism and really disgraceful stuff. And I think that there should be more money going into this. I also heard from the DUP that they wanted to see far more people being able to access this. Now, the reason why we did this, the reason why our council has taken on responsibility for a Hardship Fund, and we did this during COVID as well, if people remember, the reason why we did it was because of the criminal failure of Stormont to actually help people during the crisis when it was up and running. And our council voted itself that there was criminal failure by the executive, and that's before it was collapsed. So there was lots of space and lots of opportunity for the executive to have done a lot more before it was collapsed because of the recklessness and the selfishness of the DUP. I do think we're going to have to come back to this now because I think that we've created the idea that there's lots of money in this fund because of the way it was promoted by some councillors over the weekend. And we know that when it comes to emergency, there is a huge number of people who are going to be looking to access that. And I don't think it's good enough that it's a competition and people are going to have to fight now to try and be the first people in line, because that's going to happen before October 17th. So I do think we're going to have to look at how to expand this and to increase the hardship fund. And I think that some of the councillors that have been claiming, they've led in this, I utterly, I think it's disgraceful.
Alderman Hussey, were you looking to address the same item just before I seek a wee update on where that's at?
Correct.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I had a different number down, but I've just checked there and I see that item 135 is relevant to the previous minutes on 119. And it's the issue of accessibility. As we know, the fund has been firmed up, and the three organisations who are dealing with it, if I am not mistaken, are essentially city-based. And I have a concern as to accessibility for our rural population. And I wonder, can anybody give me any consolation as to how that matter is going to be addressed? We haven't had a local growth partnership board meeting since the ideas were firmed up, but it's certainly something that I'm sure our partnership, my own partnership board, and many others will want to consider. And the point has already been made about those who are getting in line. I'm looking at the figure from my own DEA, which is approximately 32,000. That's 320 households who have the opportunity with regard to the emergency that they would find themselves in. What about others who find themselves in an emergency and don't get into the queue? Could this council leave itself open to being followed on that? How were people chosen to actually receive assistance? So it's the accessibility issue, and as already been pointed out, the actual amount within there, it's scratching the surface. And I mean, there is a responsibility on central government to come up with something on regard to this. This is something outside of our remit that this council is taking on board, and we're really allowing central government to abrogate their responsibility. We need to be careful about it. Thank you, Chair.
No worries. I'll come back to you for your second item after this. I have a few other indicated speakers on the same item. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Chair. And I suppose the main point in relation to this is, and I would agree with Councillor Harkin in that respect, is that we do need an update. There's quite a lot of interest, and it's not just advice providers that are getting contacted. It's all of us as elected members are being inundated by calls in relation to this as well. So any clarity and any clarity around the conversations with advice providers would definitely be welcome, because we know the pressure that they're under. We know that was reflected in the support that we provided through the Hardship Fund. They sort of help ensure that advice providers that pressure is reflected in our financial support to them. Just in relation to Councillor Harkin's comments, and I think it's only right, because it's been mentioned quite a few times by Councillor Harkin and others around original proposals. They put £3 million into a hardship fund. Now, what I think is disgraceful is that Councillor Harkin is passing the burden of or the responsibility of supporting people onto the repairs. This is, and I'll agree with the previous speakers. This is it's been a failure of government to provide the necessary support, and it's a failure of the institutions that are up and storming, because they're not actually are able to meet and to discuss and agree measures of support to people. There's been a failure in the government in Westminster as well. And they're the people that have the real levers of power to provide practical support to people. And they've been found lacking in that regard. But in relation to the original point of the £3 million, Councillor Harkin doesn't bother showing up. The finance working group that's been set up with council that actually goes into the detail of the financial pressures the council's under. Councillor Harkin has ignored the fact that by spending that £3 million in the Hardship Fund, we wouldn't have been in a position to support our workers who were taking industrial action, who he was standing in picket lines with, and promising the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, the rest of us have got round the table and worked out practical solutions where we can provide the necessary support. In relation to Councillor Harkin, I haven't heard anything practical in relation to what he's bringing to the table, how us as a council should be moving forward. There's it seems as if council have a blank check they write out. We want to provide as much support as we can. We're not bankrupt on council. We want to protect services as well, because people need support, but people need their brands emptied. People need the services the council are providing. And in relation to that, I think all of us have a duty in relation to that. And I think the work of that financial working group around how we can go through the financial the financial situation within council and ensure that we can protect services and provide support when we can. But the most important thing is that we avoid any unnecessary hikes in rates. And Sean Harkin isn't in the room. He's completely abdicating his responsibility in that regard, and that needs pointed out. But in relation to the rest of us, I look forward to the engagement and working through it. And if there is opportunities to provide additional support, I would hope and trust that that we as a council, whilst it isn't our responsibility, that we will step up and provide that support when we can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Farrell, and then I'm going to go to Una just to get a wee update. And I know I have a couple other speakers, but I just want to give Una the chance to come in because there's been quite a few points that have been made.
Thanks, Chair. And I am in 100% agreement with Councillor Jackson's comments. I don't know where Councillor Harkin's coming from. When he made the proposal that we would allocate £3 million this hardship fund, I don't know what planet he was on, because the money wasn't available then and it's not available now. And he led people up the garden path and suggested that council is going to be able to step in and fix every problem regarding fuel poverty across this city and district. We all knew he was wrong. I suspect he knew he was wrong as well, but we are where we are. We supported an amendment that said we would identify how much money was available to support people. That's what we've done. We've got £308,000, 200 grand from the rate support grant, over 40 grand from councillors not taking their annual uplift, and there was a small surplus from last year. That's where we got the money. The £3 million was never available. And Councillor Harkin is great at telling us what we should have done. He's not that great at turning up at meetings and actually being involved in the discussions. We finalised and we approved this hardship fund at Health and Communities 2 weeks ago. Councillor Harkin stayed for 5 minutes, whilst the rest of us stayed for 5 hours. And he was absent at the financial working group the other day, where we had a very wide-ranging discussion about what the financial pressures that this council is facing. He didn't turn up to that. And, you know, he's on about spending ratepayers' money that's already been budgeted for. And he didn't even turn up at the rates meeting either. So, Councillor Harkin, catch yourself on.
I'll just pass over to you for the update on the Hardship Fund. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, members, for your comments. Just with respect to Councillor Harkin's comments, there's been very, very significant interest in this programme, which is no surprise to anybody. Our advice service partners, our local support organisations, elected members and also council officers have since last week received a very, very significant number of queries in relation to it. So we've been able to answer those queries and advise anybody who's made contact that this is an emergency fuel support programme and it won't be open for another couple of weeks. And we really need to stress the fact that it is an emergency. It's not a general support programme. We would love to be in that position, but unfortunately we don't have those resources. Our advice service partners have been absolutely fantastic in terms of working with us. Unfortunately, one of them has indicated that they will not be able to provide that check in terms of the eligibility check. The other two are able to do that, and we had a meeting this afternoon to work through the logistics of that and to make the process as streamlined as possible. And I'm delighted to say that we've made really, really good progress in relation to that. In terms of Alderman Hussey's comments, again, just to advise members and to give you an update that our advice service partners are helping us to check eligibility, but the referrals themselves can come from an individual household or can come through local support organisations. And we've met with the 3 local growth partnerships in the rural area this afternoon just to actually identify who their local support organisations would be that would really help to identify those households most in need. And I'm very happy to say again that we've been able to identify some of those organisations, and from tomorrow we'll be in further contact with the support organisations to make sure that they're fully aware of the programme and what support they can give in terms of identifying households in needs. In terms of Councillor Jackson's comments, it's very timely because following the 2 meetings this afternoon, and we have a further meeting with our advice service providers on Friday morning, that we wanted to bring our elected members together under the auspices of the Hardship Fund Working Group at the beginning of next week, just to give you an update in terms of the process, in terms of the type of support and documentation that will be required and how we've been able to streamline the process. So I'll get that date out tomorrow and get the confirmation to elected members. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Una. My next indicated speaker on this item is Councillor Doyle.
Chair, thanks for allowing me in. I want to particularly thank Una for the very helpful conversation that we had yesterday and for processing, I suppose, my proposal to have a hardship working group, as soon as possible, because I am quite concerned that as much as the news of this fund has spread like wildfire, as much as we know it is an emergency fund, the amount of calls and that we're getting, that advice providers are getting, the council is getting, is indicative of the fact that so many people are in an emergency at the moment. And you know, the documentation aspect of it, I think, is critical, because I'm convinced that this fund isn't going to last a week. And I have to be realistic about that. And what I don't want is, you know, a pensioner, for example, ringing up on a Monday, not being able to get a statement, for example, about their pension or a bank statement for 3 or 4 days, and then the fund having run out before they come back to it. So I think that's really critical that we're able to do that. In terms of, I have to agree with what Sean said at the beginning of his statement there with regards to recent interviews. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my coffee cup through the front window of my own house when I heard some people on the radio who had only a month ago refused to add more money to the hardship fund, and now saying that it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But you know, ultimately we do have a responsibility to not only help people, but to do so in a sustainable way. But it's all right at the same time saying that council can't do everything, but you know, it's from the same parties whose MLAs are still taking their full salaries for doing half a job. You know, I don't think they seem to realise that, you know, that the hypocrisy between that and being able to say that we can't add £145,000, which was my proposal at the last meeting, to the hardship fund. MLAs have been paid over £1 million. People are furious, and to not see that, I mean, that's for other people to determine. But I have to say, we have to get round the table and we have to pan out a way that's going to ensure that this gets out to people. But let's be very clear, and I think anybody who recognises and is out on the ground recognises at this point, this isn't going to help everybody. I know that. But at the same time, waiting for Stormont to get back up and running, or waiting for a Tory government to realise that people in Derry and Strabane are getting it tight, is a non-starter, and doing nothing is not an option.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And look, can I declare an interest that I do sit on the Board of Advice Northwest? And look, I do welcome the update from Una, because at our last board meeting there were some concerns and around the eligibility checks and stuff like that there, and the issue and around rural. As a rural councillor, I have raised this at the Hardship Fund meeting. But I do welcome the ongoing discussions, Una, with yourself and the advice services here. And look, let's look at it holistically here. We have £250,000 here. That will help 2,500 people within our council area. And yes, you know, would we like more? There is, but with that comes a cost at the end of the day. And, you know, I always say, you know, you have to always, you know, some Councillor Harkin through his comments that he wanted 3 million in there. By throwing out those comments, that's raising expectations among many of our people in need within the council area. But look, 2,500 people, as I say, will receive this, and it is an emergency fund. It is at the end of the day what it is, and you know.
Hello.
I think let's say, would we like more? But look, at the end of the day, do we want to burden our ratepayers with extra money, no matter where we get it? I think we've been through the process, and look, I do believe that the finance working group is where a lot of these issues can be discussed. But I'm hearing that some people aren't attending.
Would it matter if I was 10 or 15 minutes late?
Alderman Breslin, we can all hear your phone call there. Your mic's still on. Sorry, Alderman Devaney, it's just we couldn't hear what you were saying.
Thank you very much, Chair, for warning Alderman Breslin that his mic was on. But look, all I can say is at the end of the day, we have sat down as a group on the Hardship Working Group, and we have worked out formulas, and we're trying to get as wide a proximity of people. And I know we always talk, that's why we raised the barrel up to those earning up to 40,000, which widened that. But look, I think we have to manage expectations. But once again, we have £250,000 there. Do we wish there was more? We wish we could. But unfortunately, if we do that, we have to burden the ratepayers. And look, we have to manage our services as a council, because, as one of the previous speakers did say, yes, if you put 3 million in there, but where do we cut it? And, you know, we're only after agreeing a pay raise with our staff, which I welcome. There is no problem around that there. But these asks have to be all financed at the end of the day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. Councillor Donnelly.
Chair. Chair, look, we could go round in circles for, regarding the 3 million. There's a lot of councillors here claiming credit for everything, but responsibility for nothing. You know, when this council voted to reject a pay raise for councillors, a number of SDLP members took to social media proclaiming how, you know, solidarity with the working class and all that. But what wasn't said was that there's at least 3 salaries going into these people's homes. You know, what we won't hear about is that when it was put to the parties here, they put their chair and vice chair allowances into the pot. You could almost see them squirming, and some of them hid behind the legality. Is this even legal? We hear the SDLP talking about the Ritz. I wasn't at the Ritz meeting. I was in the Brandywell talking to a young woman who was about to be evicted out of her home. And the cynic in me will tell me that the SDLP voted against the Ritz because they probably knew that it wouldn't go through anyway. And when we look at our Ritz meetings around the 6 counties, the same party supported a rise in rates in these other councils. So it'll be interesting to see how they vote for the rates this year and the following years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Barr.
Thank you, Chair. I would concur with a lot of what Alderman Hussey has said. I hope I'm wrong, but unfortunately, I think this scheme might just create more problems than it's going to solve. The reluctance of some of those in the community sector to engage speaks volumes. Quite simply, that they're terrified of the backlash when this money runs out, as it will do very quickly. So, bottom line is, more funding needs to be sourced from somewhere, should it be central government or whatever. And again, as Alderman Hussey alluded to, are we leaving ourselves open here?
Thank you. Councillor Harkin, you have already spoke to this, so I'm going to ask you to be brief when I allow you back in there. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I will try to be brief, but there was a number of things said about me personally about missing meetings. I missed the health and community meeting, because I had a sick partner and I had to look after 2 children. And I don't go looking at the attendance of every councillor. Maybe we should do that now, but that's why I wasn't able to attend that meeting. But I thought all that was just nonsense in response to the actual discussion about the Hardship Fund, because the thing is, it was the right thing to propose a Hardship Fund, because we can't sit in our hands here while Stormont, when it was up and running, was doing nothing. That's the issue here. We proposed this when Stormont was actually running, because they weren't doing enough. And many of the parties here, the representatives in Stormont, were doing very little. Their ministers. We proposed 3 million because that's what we were told was available in terms of a surplus. If we had proposed £50,000, I'm sure that the councillors in here would have proposed that we set up a hardship fund of 10. And if anybody here has ever been involved in a negotiation, you ask for more than you think you're going to get, because employers never give up. They will try to bargain you down. So yes, we were trying to get as much as we could, and we would do it again. And the same parties in here, I'm sorry, that are talking about workers' rights were the same ones that were prepared to undercut the demands workers were making. And it was only because of the threat of a strike that they were turned around on that. So look, the issue is here, I'm hearing councillors saying 2 things. This is a brilliant fund. Our council's leading from the front. But then when we're in here in the meeting, they're scolding those of us who supported it and saying this, we shouldn't be doing this. You can't have it both ways. And that's what I'm saying about the opportunism, about parties that didn't just attempt to weaken it, but attempted to block it at the start. And that was the SDLP and Sinn Féin that did that. I just find it frustrating that they're the first out then attempting to claim credit for this. And the reality is this could have been a bigger fund that would have helped more people. And that's even more pressing right now, given that Stormont isn't up and running, and given that the Tories have been so absolutely awful. And look, you know, there are things that caretaker Stormont ministers can do, and we need to bring more pressure there as well. So this all brings pressure back on the council to do whatever it can to help people here. And I stand by all the proposals we made, and I'm sure the other councillors who backed up the proposal around the hardship fund would feel the same way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey, Councillor Harkin. Alderman Hussey, same sentiment there. You've already spoke to this item, so I would ask that you be brief.
I will be brief, Chair. First, I'll make a comment. It's going to be a long run into next May's council election. Point that I was going to ask is on Una's update. She mentioned meeting with the 3 partnership boards. I presume she means she met with the chairs of the 3 partnership boards, because I'm sure there are partnership board members in here who didn't meet. So I presume it was the chairs, and I presume that whatever was discussed at that will be brought back by the chairs to the appropriate boards. Thank you, Mayor, or Chair.
Twice now you've said Mayor instead of Chair. I'll pass over to Una there. She'll answer that question.
Thanks very much, Chair. And just to very quickly go through some of those further comments. So, Councillor Doyle, I understand the concerns that, you know, whenever somebody submits their referral form, if they've got missing documentation, hopefully we'll have addressed that, because we're going to provide 5 days to supply any outstanding information, and the advice service providers will work with those individual households in order to obtain that information. And the meeting with elected members at the beginning of next week will hopefully provide you with all those reassurances in terms of the technical aspects of this particular programme. And Alderman Hussey, yes, it was the chairs of the local growth partnerships that we met with this afternoon, and further updates will be provided. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, and we look forward to the hardship working group and getting the further information and finalising details. Members, it's now 20 past 6, and I'm just conscious that we've been here for 2 hours and 20 minutes. So I'm going to take a short break. We'll come back at, we say 6:30? Come back at 6:30, and we'll continue. And Alderman Hussey, you'll be on your second item there straight away when we come back. Thank you. Okay, members, that's us back. So Alderman Hussey, you had a second item under matters arising, 143/22. If you want to go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll get you promoted yet, but anyway, thank you, Chair. 143, a couple of issues had been raised in there. I had raised the issue of representation on outside bodies, monitoring of the representation. Just to exemplify the situation, I am not a delegate, but I attended an organization that we have 8 delegates elected to represent us all on. There was only one of those 8 who attended that particular event organized by a particular body. I'm not naming the body, but it does concern me, and I'm sure it's not deliberate, but I would hate to think that there would almost be some people who would get themselves put onto bodies to block other members who would have a keen interest from being part of that. But I'm sure that will be looked into, monitoring of the representation that wasn't covered as we went through the rest of the issues. The other thing was I'd raised an issue with regard to visitary and its terms of reference, etc. And the Chief Executive undertook to investigate the issues raised both by myself with regard to visitary and by Alderman Thompson with regard to the Waterside Local Growth Partnership. Is there a report on that yet, or is it forthcoming? Thank you, Chair.
Alderman Hussey, just in relation to the query that you made regarding the Waterside Growth Partnership, yeah, we followed up following your concerns raised at the meeting and actually got the list of members, and we have so that was confirmed to the Democratic Services Department, and they have updated the list accordingly.
Sorry, Rachel, that was Alderman Thompson, not myself. Sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Just in relation to the report or your comments regarding Visit Dairy, the Chief Executive has confirmed they'll have a report, but it'll be coming through Business and Culture as opposed to governance. So that'll be brought forward in due course.
Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Alderman Devaney, you looking to come on there?
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And look, I think we're getting into shaky water here because over this last, before we took the break, you're in discussions about who's attending meetings. I never look at anyone's attendance at meetings because I do know sometimes I'm under pressure for attending meetings. I have maybe 3 meetings on at one time. And look, that's what happens in this game here. And look, at the end of the day, look, if I know what Alderman Hussey is getting at and around, because he has spoke to my group in relation to nomination to a committee. And, you know, at the end of the day, I want to put it on clear. We never nominated anyone to a committee just to keep someone off or anything like that there. We took our nominations on those committees as they came forward and that we thought best what was left in the pack for us. And sometimes that works out for parties and sometimes it doesn't. There are probably within my grouping, within the DEP, some wanted on other committees, and unfortunately those positions were taken by some other party or some other member, and there's nothing we can do within that process. But just to put on our record, Chair, our party is not watching who's attending meetings because I think that's a very, very difficult avenue to go down, because I remember people in the past raising issues and around attendance. And see, when there was scrutiny done and around parties and stuff like that there, we can all fall foul of it, so we can. But just to put that on the record, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. Alderman Thompson?
Thanks, Chair. Again, I'm not going to go over what Alderman Devaney has went over there, but I will confirm that I have received the information regarding the Waterside Growth Partnership. It was sent to me within probably about a week of my asking for the information. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I have nobody else indicated under matters arising for the last meeting, so we will move on to item 8, which is the plan and review, pages 133 to 142, and I'll pass over to John and Eamon, who are going to cover that item.
Thank you, Chair. So members will recall that at the April full council meeting, a notice of motion was passed expressing council concern at recent criticism of the planning system from both the Audit Office and the PAC. Council acknowledges that improvements are required to address perceived delays within our planning department. Council will therefore immediately convene a task and finish group to examine the 2 reports and implement any recommendations that will improve our operation locally. We will also provide feedback to the Department for Infrastructure on improvements we feel could be made across the statutory partners. So members, implementation of this notice of motion has subsequently been considered by the Planning Working Group, which has met since on 3 occasions. And I suppose a summary of that is that during these meetings, the Planning Working Group has been very clear that it wishes to affect change in the delivery of the planning system, and that change is both measurable and demonstrable to users of the service. The Planning Working Group is very clear that it wishes to take forward a defined piece of work that will produce a firm set of improvement objectives and recommendations, including a timed implementation and monitoring plan. The basis of the work should be the 3 reports that are highlighted in this report. The first of those being the independent review of the planning service that was taken forward in 2017 and its recommendations. The second is the recent Northern Ireland Audit Office report on the planning system across Northern Ireland, and the third one being the recent PAC report that was published back in the spring. The working group is also absolute in that the work should be informed by structured engagement with elected members at the heart of the work. A range of stakeholders, which includes developers, planning agents, environmental groups, etc. Those who are interfacing, if you like, with the planning system, and also with senior council officers. So, bearing all of that in mind, various options to take this work forward were considered across the 3 planning working group meetings. There was detailed discussions in and around all of this. The pros and cons of each option were considered by the working group. Very broadly speaking, the mechanism of it all and how it was to be taken forward was also considered, and it was the scope of it was also worked through with a view that it would be taken forward most efficiently in 2 phases. Phase 1 being a review of those 3 reports, the engagement with the various stakeholders that I've mentioned, and then the development very quickly of an action-based improvement plan. Then following up with phase 2 on the implementation of those recommendations, a change management process to ensure that the recommendations were taken through in a timely manner, a monitoring of the actions and the service improvements, and reporting arrangements to monitor in that progress. So the 3 options that were considered to take this forward were the first one being the re-engagement of the independent consultant team who undertook the 2017 review. Option 2 was the procurement of various ranges of support to guide us through those 2 phases of work through an organisation such as IESE or APSE or SIPFA. Members will be familiar with the work that they've supported with us in the past. And option 3 was through an open process to procure a consultant. So the planning working group at its most recent meeting were minded to move forward with the third option, i.e. open procurement, as set out in the paper. Another variant of that option, which combines options 1 and 3, may also be one which members might want to consider, i.e. advancing phase 1 straight away through the re-engagement of the independent consultants who undertook the 2017 report, and then subsequently considering option 3, a mechanism to take forward phase 2, which is the implementation of the subsequent implementation or improvement objectives and actions, the monitoring of that, and the reporting framework for taking forward those recommendations. So members, obviously considerable detail and a lot of discussion across the 3 working groups. In terms of section 4, the financial implications for all of this, quite difficult to assess at this stage, but we have done a little bit of work around it, and depending on which option is chosen, very roughly a budget of between 40,000 and 50,000 is expected to be required for phase 1 of the works. Phase 2 of the works will then obviously be subsequently scoped, and a further identification of budget will be required at that time once the input into phase 2 is absolutely determined at a later date. So members, I trust that's a sufficient summary of the outworkings of the planning working group. Thanks to the officer team and to the members for the considerable work that was done on it. And I pass it to you now for comment and recommendation in relation to the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The first indicated speaker on this item is Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm not a member of this committee, so I can make a proposal, but I have been part of the planning working group, and I think John, as the Chief Executive, has summarised the discussion quite well. One of the things that I want to reflect on the planning working group is the very positive approach that everybody took in relation to it. I think the 2017 report, when during the discussion, it had been highlighted that there are practical steps that council could take contained within that, and indeed there's quite a lot of those steps that council have explored and implemented. So, but one of the things in terms of the 3 meetings of the working group, there has been wide consensus, not only from members but including officers as well, of the desire to improve the service and the increase efficiency of the service. So, from a starting point, I think we're all on the one page, and it's just in terms of working out the mechanics around how we get there. The working group has, as John has outlined, there had been a desire to go with option 3. From our party's perspective, we're still in that frame of mind in terms of bringing in consultants with the expertise and experience around change management and implementing change. But in terms of the phased approach, and given the time constraints that would come into play with the public procurement, we would be minded to explore engagement with those independent consultants who commissioned who collated the 2017 report, and bring them back in and ask and request that report be refreshed, taking into consideration the changes the council have implemented through those recommendations, just to review the effectiveness of those changes, and to see where we are. So refreshing that initial report is something that we see as an important first step, and that those independent consultants that carried out that report would be best placed to do that. But in relation to the recommendation or the direction of travel that the planning working group came to in relation to option 3, we still feel that that's an important step. So the procurement element of it for phase 2 is something that that we feel that we should be going out to public procurement for. But in terms of the review of the report, and that first step is it's probably it would be much quicker, it would be it would probably be make more sense that if we went down that route first, they bring those independent consultants in if it's possible to do so. So if we could explore that, and then and with the intention that in terms of implementing the recommended changes coming out of the back of the updated report, that we would be taking the direction that we went in terms of option 3. So I hope that makes sense. But in terms of the engagement and the work of the working group, it's something that I've personally been very encouraged by, because the approach from everybody that took part in those discussions was that how can we do things better? How can we deliver for this city and district? So that's something that I take and our party takes great encouragement from. It's just in terms of how we walk through this process, and the first step in that is an important one, and I suppose making contact and engaging with those that carried out the 2017 report is an important first step, because the 2017 report contains very good, solid recommendations that we feel, if implemented fully, could result in a much improved planning service within our city and district. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Boyle?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to keep it brief. I know we've been sat here now for some considerable time. And I am a member of the committee, so clearly I can make a proposal, and I do intend to make a proposal, Chair. So just to roll back a little bit, I suppose, in a sense, very au fait with the process that was undertaken in 2017, and as one of the members of the planning committee, and I know many others as well, would have engaged with those who carried out that report on our behalf in 2017. And then obviously subsequently now we've seen the NAAO report, the PAC reports. They're very current. They do point very specifically to difficulties that are experienced by absolutely every single council in the north, and they are not peculiar or specific simply to the planning processes within our own council, and I think most elected members certainly understand that. But it's important that we do examine that 27 report again, use it as the basis for moving forward, looking at the various recommendations that came out of that report and assessing just how successful we have been in implementing that particular report. I know that there's a variance in terms of whether we have changed 80% of what we were doing, or was it 70%? Well, that's what I suppose the review will tell us. It's important to note as well, Chair, actually, that the considerations that the Planning Working Group have been going through and working on it's been a process that was instigated some considerable time ago. It's not new. It's not something that popped up out of somebody's head last week or the week before or a month before that. You know, all of these things, unfortunately, they do take a little bit of time, but it's important that they do, because we want, in the first instance, we want to do our best to get these things right. And we know that not everything's right. So we know that, we understand that. Just to say, I'm also thankful to officers for their input into this over the last while, and indeed those elected members who have joined in with the Planning Working Group, because it's not specifically just simply, as you'll know, Chair, members of the Planning Committee. It's any elected member who wants to feed into that, and there have been many non-Planning Committee members who have come forward with their own views as well. So
I suppose in further consideration, the SDLP group, we've kicked it around ourselves, and with further consideration, we have come to a particular conclusion. And we are looking at the report in front of us. We're inclined to support the idea, and I think this is where Councillor Jackson was coming from as well, of the hybrid suggestion that's contained in 3.10 of the report. That members might want to consider the review in 2 stages. We're supportive of that. That certainly has a direction of travel that, in our consideration, would probably be best and most cost effective for our ratepayers, an efficient way of reaching a timely conclusion. And as I said, the important thing here is to get through a process and get through it to bring our system to a position where it's as good as we can possibly make it right now. And a procurement exercise, and as I said, we're reflecting back on some of what was said on the planning working group, and our feeling is that the procurement exercise that we were all considering would perhaps take too long and wouldn't perhaps get us the results that we want to get. So we are also content with the proposed terms of reference as presented to us in the paper today. Certainly a logical way to proceed, and so therefore, Chair, you'll need a proposal from me, and I propose to this committee that we accept the recommendation at 3.10 in the report, and I'm sure all members can see that in the papers in front of them, so I don't think I need to try and read that out into the record, Chair. So I leave it at that.
And just for the record, Councillor Mooney has just seconded your proposal there. So
thank you, Chair.
It's been proposed and seconded. My next indicated speaker is Councillor Doyle.
Thanks, Chair. And I concur with what Christopher had said about the manner in which all parties have engaged, and I mean all parties, including staff, have engaged with the planning workshop. One of the things that has come to my attention just between that last meeting and this is that there are a number of people, developers and others, who are keen that not only to engage in terms of the process going forward, but are also very keen that the council hear specifically from them on the good, bad and indifferent with regards to our planning service. And I know obviously that there's reference in the terms of reference here for stakeholder engagement, and that's perfectly reasonable. But I do think that it would be helpful in the in the long term for us to hear specifically from some of those people who use the service as well. Maybe at a planning committee, that's not for me to say, but I just wanted to pass those views on because there is a lot of people watching with immense interest as to how this progresses. Thank you.
Thank you, and those comments will be noted, Councillor Doyle. Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And just can I say, first of all, from the DP, I welcome this report coming forward here. And I think we're all aware of the difficulties sometimes getting through the planning service, getting a planning application through, whether it be for a private dwelling or developers on a bigger scale. And look, I always commend the work that our planning officers do. There are difficulties in that. And I've always raised the issue and around responses from statutory agencies, because we as a planning or planners, our planners can't move forward without them coming back. But I see coming from this working group that there between them and planning officers and all officers that there is a desire to improve the efficiencies of the planning service, and that has to be welcome. So it has to be. And look, I do take on board what the previous speaker said about stakeholders. I think we should be talking, and there should be an open discussion with some developers, even the agents, because they get frustrated at times with the process. But Chair, just to welcome the report, and we're happy to support the recommendation, and on 3.10, I think that is the best way to move forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney, and thank you to everybody that spoke to that report. All comments have been noted and will be taken on board moving forward. We do have a proposal that has been seconded and nobody seems to be against that, so I'm going to consider that as passed. And we'll move on to the next item of business, which is item 9, which is the Anti-Poverty Action Plan, pages 143 to 146. And I'll pass over to Una, who's going to lead us through that report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Members, the purpose of this report is to seek your approval of the recommendations that have come forward from the Anti-Poverty Task and Finish Group. And you'll recall that this task group was established whenever the motion of C195/20 came forward, which was really trying to look at the situation regarding poverty and deprivation. And there were 6 different components to that motion, members. And you'll recall over this last 18 months or so that we've been providing regular updates from the Task and Finish Group who've been leading on this work, and particularly in relation to the research that was carried out regarding poverty within our council area, which has acted as a very important document whenever we've been lobbying and seeking for targeted interventions within our council area. We've had ongoing liaison with different government departments, particularly around DERA and DFC, regarding how to influence new strategies that are coming forward, particularly around the anti-poverty strategy for Northern Ireland, the People in Place strategy, and also in terms of the rural policy framework, in order to make sure that we get maximum benefit within our council area. Members, you'll also recall that we have undertaken a partnership arrangement with UBI in terms of testing the feasibility of universal basic income within our council area, and that has fallen under the remit also of the Task and Finish Group. So as you can see from the report that within this particular motion, 5 of the 6 actions have now been fully implemented with ongoing activity in relation to all of them. And today, members, whilst the original proposal was to look at anti-poverty, a lot of our focus in recent months has been around hardship and dealing with the cost of living crisis. And you can see within the key issues that it's now the recommendation coming forward from the Task and Finish Group that we put more focus now on issues that are relating to medium to long-term interventions in terms of steering people out of poverty or providing pathways and preventing people from getting into poverty in the first place. But in recent weeks and months, there's been a very active campaign around drawing to attention around the cost of living, and the members of the Task and Finish Group wanted to draw your attention to particular initiatives that have come forward from the rally at the Guildhall Square, both led by the Mayor, but also most recently in terms of Saturday's rally, but also the event that was preceded by the Crushed by the Cost of Living event, which was held in Stormont. Members, you can see that there are very specific asks in relation to the Northern Ireland Executive. The first is to pause social security debt for 6 months, to reinstate the £20 uplift to universal credit and extend its legacy benefits, that there should be a once-off payment of £500 to those entitled to disability benefits or carers allowance, and that there should be a removal of the 2-child limit for universal credit and child tax credit. The members of the Task and Finish Group want to commend these recommendations to you, and that we should write to the Northern Ireland Executive in seeking implementation of these particular actions that would seem to provide immediate relief to a number of families and households that are in difficulty. The second part of the recommendation coming forward from the Task and Finish Group now is to extend the membership of the Task and Finish Group and bring in external representation that will help the Council develop the actions for anti-poverty. You can see within section 3.3 that the Anti-Poverty Task and Finish Group has really reinforced the need for them to be consistent and provide synergy in terms of the work coming forward from the Strategic Inclusive Growth Plan and the Emerging Northern Ireland Anti-Poverty Strategy, and also all that ongoing work that has been taken forward through different council motions on procurement, social value and employability. Members, you can see in section 3.4 suggestions of who those external partners might be. There are others, for example, Dairy Against Fuel Poverty. Organisations have been very proactive around addressing poverty, and we would look to seek their involvement in helping us to design some of these medium to long-term interventions that will be taken forward. Obviously, this is at a co-design stage, and therefore there are no financial implications, and it's recommended that members would approve these proposals that are coming forward from the Anti-Poverty Task and Finish Group. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Anna. Thank you for all your work on that. I'm on that Task and Finish Group, so I know what you're putting into it, so thank you. First speaker on that is Councillor Farrell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Una, for the report. So we totally support the recommendations. Poverty and deprivation was an issue across Derry and Strabane long before the onset of the cost of living crisis. We have the lowest wage levels in the north, we have the highest unemployment in the north, we have the highest levels of poverty and child poverty, and we have the highest rates of economic inactivity, and action is needed now. And we agree that we should write the Stormont ministers requesting a pause in benefit debt recovery for the next 6 months. We agree that the universal credit £20 uplift should be reinstated and extended to legacy benefits. We agree that there should be a £500 payment to people in receipt of carers allowance or any disability benefit. And we agree that the 2-child limit should be removed from child tax credits and universal credit. We have concerns around the ability of those to be implemented or delivered in the absence of an executive. And we have massive concerns about the abject failure to deliver the North's anti-poverty strategy. We've had the recommendations from the expert panel. It's being worked on in a sort of co-design function, but it can't be delivered because it needs executive approval. And we don't have an executive. So the DUP have a lot to answer for here. In terms of cost of living, they are preventing financial support going out to people that need it. But if we look at poverty in a wider sense, we don't have an anti-poverty strategy, and we won't have an anti-poverty strategy until the DUP return to work. So poverty and the root causes of poverty are not going to be addressed until the DUP go back to work, and that is shameful. But we support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farrell. Councillor Heaney.
Thanks, Chair. And like Councillor Farrell, I would agree with what he's saying in relation to not just the implementation, but even I was going to question how we actually implement this recommendation. Should it get passed today because we don't have an executive to write to? So I'm assuming what Councillor Farrell says, the suggestion is that this council would write to the caretaker ministers rather than the executive, and as he also said, they don't have any ability to implement any of these extremely important asks that people vitally need at this time. So, you know, it goes without saying it's well past time the DUP get over themselves and get back to work and allow the people that we represent to get the support and the financial assistance that they deserve and badly need. So just to get that clarity, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Heaney. Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, thank you to Una, because since this motion was first brought to the Council, there's been a tremendous amount of work done. And Una and a team of Council officers have really driven that forward. And as the original mover of the motion, I appreciate it. And this was before COVID, and it was certainly before the cost of living crisis. And the reason why we did this back then was to get the grips with the scale of poverty in our district and to try and do something about it as a council. I I think we have a great understanding of the scale of poverty. It's only got worse in the last 2 years, which is very, very unfortunate. And obviously, we can't say now that we have addressed the crisis of poverty in our district. I 100% agree with everyone that in terms of the recommendations, in terms of the 4 demands that the Crushed by the Cost of Living campaign put forward, most of them can't be acted on. 3 of them, to my mind, can't be acted on. And the DUP continue to back the Tories, despite the way that they are crushing people right across all our communities. And there's a tremendous amount of indifference by the DUP to the hardship people face in our right across our society. They must be hearing that, because it's the main thing that people are talking about. But before the DUP collapsed the executive, not enough was being done by all the big parties. So I think we should certainly demand that the DUP get back in. It's absolutely ridiculous that they're boycotting it. But for these proposals to actually be implemented, we need a different type of Stormont. We need a different type of executive that will have different priorities, that will see workers and the vulnerable and the people who are the least well off becoming the priority for government action. And that's what the anti-poverty strategy is all about. So, let's get that done. But there's a tremendous amount of cynicism. The one thing that I will probably disagree with Councillor Heaney on is that a lot of people think pausing the social security, pausing debt reductions is possible, and that's been now a growing campaign demand. Look, we're in a situation where the Tories are going on an all-out attack. The DUP are keeping Stormont down. We have to fight to change that reality and what they're doing, but we also have to look for measures that can help people right away. And a lot of people think that the DFC minister can can pause debt deductions for 6 months in the middle of this cost of living crisis. And look, if that's possible, it should be done, because we're as a council trying to help people, while at the same time those people who we're helping are going to be having money taken out of their pockets for advanced universal credit loans, for advanced loans that they've got to try and help them pay the bills. So, I think caretaker ministers and parties should do what they can if it's possible. And I think we have to keep the pressure on around that demand. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. That was my last speaker. Is there anything you want to pick up on from any of the comments, or are you happy enough?
Yeah, happy, Chair, and just in relation to understand the comments about the ability to implement, but what came across very, very strongly at the event in Stormont was the importance of having a collective voice. So whilst maybe only one of the 4 can be implemented immediately or has the potential to be implemented, it's just so important that we keep reinforcing the messaging around the need for intervention. So I think on that basis, it's just really important to take it forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Una. At this stage, I haven't heard anybody speaking against the recommendations, although I haven't had any proposers or seconders for it. So Councillor Farrell proposed and Councillor Heaney has seconded the proposal. You just supported them, but you didn't say propose. So I just wanted to make sure it was clear and right. So that that passes. That nobody spoke against it. So thank you very much for that, Una. And we'll see how that progresses as we move forward. Moving on to item 10, which is the Domestic and Sexual Violence and Abuse Policy and Guidance, pages 147 to 166. And I'm going to hand over to Paula, who is going to take us through that report. Thanks, Paula.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to seek members' approval on a draft domestic and sexual violence and abuse policy, which has been drafted. Domestic and sexual violence and abuse is generally recognised as a pattern of behaviour which is characterised by the exercise of coercive control and the misuse of power by one person over another. It is usually frequent and persistent, and it is used to harm, punish or frighten the victim. Research highlights the impact of abuse on employees who face a range of practical concerns when attempting to seek help and support. From the perspective of an employer, these difficulties can then result in lost output, additional costs and the need for additional resources. So as a council, we are committed to working with our employees to provide a safe working environment and therefore have developed a policy in consultation with the recognised trade unions. The policy has been developed based on best practice in other organisations and advice and guidance from organisations including Women's Aid. It also reflects recent guidance set out in the government's employer guidelines on dealing with domestic and sexual violence in the workplace. The overall aim of the proposed policy is to create a safer workplace and also to send out a strong message that domestic and sexual violence and abuse is unacceptable by creating awareness and support to our employees, to assist employees experiencing domestic violence and abuse, as well as providing them with guidance on managing situations where employers are perpetrators of domestic violence and abuse. The policy also supports the Domestic Abuse Safe Leave Bill 2022, entitling victims of domestic abuse to 10 days paid leave each leave year. There are no financial or legal or any other implications with this policy at this time, and it has been screened out for equality. So it's recommended that members approve the policy as attached in the appendix, and as an organisation we can then implement this. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. The first speaker that's indicated on this item is Councillor Doyle.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. I'm by no means an expert on any of this, and it's very important that we temper our language, of course. There's obviously been a particular focus, and rightly so, on violence against women and girls, and it's good to see that this policy is coming forward because we do need to protect all of our staff. I'm just interested in terms of Women's Aid is mentioned in the report itself as one of the organisations that we spoke to. Did we speak? Can we get an overview of what other organisations we spoke to? And I say that because I'm a board member of the Men's Action Network who do some work on this as well, and I don't know if there's been that level of consultation just with other types of groups like that. The other thing as well is, and it's just a question really because it kind of jumped out at me, and I'm sure there's a perfectly good reason for it, but page 156, Chair 5.1, the last bullet point, I'll just read it here. If a member of staff is reported as being a perpetrator of domestic and sexual violence and abuse, Council will take all reasonable steps to address it in an appropriate manner. And then it goes on to say, Council will provide perpetrators with signposting to support systems. Now, I mean, I'm sure, like I say, there's a very good reason for that type of language, but I'm wondering, is that robust enough? Is that something that, do we want to be saying that we're going to be offering, almost as a first step, that we want to be signposting guidance? Now, I'm sure there's, like I say, an expert reason for this, but I would like to think that as an organisation that not only are we not, neutral when it comes to situations where we may be dealing with a situation where an employee is either the perpetrator or a victim, but that we have processes in place to robustly defend staff. So I'm just wondering about that language just in that particular bullet point, Chair. Thank you.
I'll just come on that before I go on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the second point in relation to providing perpetrators with the appropriate support systems, okay, the sentence before that says the Council will take all reasonable steps to address it in an appropriate manner. So again, our other policies and processes would come into place there, including disciplinary processes and policies. However, in addition to that, regardless of an outcome of a disciplinary process, if there is support that we can signpost an individual to, be it health support, occupational health, or that is something that we put in as an additional measure. So I suppose the assurance is that any such instances will be dealt with in line with the appropriate processes, including the disciplinary process if that's required, but also that there will be support provided in addition to that.
Thank you, Paula, and thanks for that clarity. Councillor Heaney, you're the next indicated speaker on that.
Thanks, Chair. Well, it's really just to say there's a very important piece of work and to thank the officers involved in it. I think it's an excellent policy and I'm happy to propose it.
Thank you, Councillor Heaney. Councillor Minnick?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second the proposal. It's an important document. In light of page 154, where the stats reveal that domestic and sexual abuse here in Northern Ireland, there was from January to the 31st of December, year end 2021, there was 32,219 domestic incidents reported and nearly 4,000 incidents of sexual abuse. And obviously sexual abuse isn't immune from workplaces. So this is a very important document that we need because obviously it's a policy that will provide comfort and direction for officers and for members of staff if it's ever needed or required. So I'm very happy to second this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Minnick, and that is now proposed and seconded, so that recommendation will carry forward, which moves us on to item 11, which is the council meeting arrangements, which are pages 167 to 174, and I'm going to hand over to Ellen for that. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, this particular item is aimed at seeking elected members' views on proposals or change in terms of the operation of the full council monthly meetings. So in the background section, the item highlights the fact that we have in the past agreed a schedule of meetings taken into consideration the hybrid format, social distancing, and also the fact that we were actually meeting and continue at this minute to meet all council meetings in a remote format. We had committed to review that, and I would now advise that, as I say, the legislation has also been reviewed, and indeed it's noted at 2.3 there that the legislation has been extended further, and indeed the use of virtual meetings has been enacted for a further 6 months up until the 24th of March 2023. The report highlights as well in terms of the background that we were also hoping to look at returning to the Strabane chamber for committee meetings. And in terms of today's meeting, I would advise that we have undertaken a procurement process, a contractor appointed, and the enhancement works at the Derry Road Chamber have now been completed, and therefore the meetings, for the committees will take place as scheduled in the Strabane Chamber. In terms of, as I say, as the COVID virus itself has changed and infection rates have also changed, the COVID guidance has also been modified. And as of the 20th of September, the guidance issued by the Public Health Agency says that where staff are going to or returning to workplaces, employers are encouraged to carefully consider the practical mitigations that might be put in place and ensure that they're suitable for their settings, and that those mitigations may include hygiene and sanitary measures, some form of social distancing, ideally of no less than 1 metre where practicable, ventilation, physical barriers, face masks and testings. Now, in light, as I say, of the normalisation process and recent experiences ourselves of some special council meetings, it's now suggested that, subject to members' views, there are a number of options that may now be considered for future council meetings. The first of those options is to continue with the virtual monthly council meetings. And the second option there has two subsets. Firstly, to return to physical meetings in the council chamber with full attendance, but with a provision to access the meeting remotely in limited circumstances. Or alternatively, option 2B there, which is return to physical meetings in the council chamber with restrictions on numbers attending and provision to again access the meetings remotely. Now, it's also highlighted in terms of the report that in the past, and subject to risk assessment, we have used an approach whereby a maximum of 2 reps from each of the political parties and each of the independent members of council were accommodated in the chamber. It's also in the context of the monthly council meeting suggested that in order to facilitate effective decision-making and mitigate the spread of COVID-19, where there is a physical meeting, that is, that the council meeting is spread over 2 evenings for a pilot period of 3 months. And specifically, the report identifies a suggestion that the monthly council meeting is rescheduled for 4 p.m. on the Wednesday, immediately preceding the current scheduled date, and that the Thursday then is used to address any unfinished business. Again, it's also submitted that subject to the views of the Mayor, the duration is limited to 4 hours in order to reflect the practice currently in place for committee meetings, and in those circumstances, business may be deferred. The report again, because we use special council meetings for the like of the award of the Freedom of the City and District, and there are 2 events coming up. It's been our practice, again, in terms of those types of events, to facilitate a maximum of 15 members in the chamber, including the Mayor, and the allocations identified in the report. And in terms then of public access to council meetings, there's no provision at the moment for physical public or media access to any full council meeting. And subject to members' comments and risk assessments, I would advise that provision could be made available for access by a limited number of public or media to the public gallery if its members wish. In the context of this paper, it's really only about the council meeting, and at the moment, the arrangements for committee meetings in the Freedom of the City remain unchanged, pending further reports. In terms of the implications of it, I suppose under the equality heading there, I would note that those members and officers with dependents with a disability and or living in a rural area may in certain circumstances find online participation more accessible than physical attendance in the Guildhall. And obviously in terms of the operation of meetings, we are intending to provide a safe, transparent and effective environment. I would also probably note to members that in terms of option 2A, which involves everybody back in the chamber, it actually will involve a modification to the guidance on the 1 metre social distance. So subject to members' views this evening, I mean, the recommendations, again, very much guided by members' views, is that option 2A is adopted as a way forward for council meetings from November. Again, subject to prevailing COVID context. The council meeting is split across 2 meetings at the Wednesday and Thursday for a pilot period of 3 months. Subject to the view of Mayor and the circumstances of the meeting, the duration of the council meeting is limited to 4 hours and unfinished business deferred. And arrangements for, as I say, for committee meetings in Freedom of the City and District continue in the current format pending further reports. And again, for member comment and direction, from November, provision is made at the monthly council meeting only for access to the public gallery by a limited number of public and or media personnel. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Ellen, for that. My first indicated speaker on this item is Councillor Mooney.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank Ellen for the extensive report and for bringing us to where we are here today. Obviously, we're here in this situation because of COVID and when everything changed due to the legislation that was brought on by COVID. But the key word I took from this year paper, and also I should say the SLP group, and when we discussed this actual item, was the word normalisation. I think now we're probably in a position to go back and certainly to what would probably be called normal, or what was normal before COVID struck. And I think the paper itself addresses a lot of the aspects there. But more importantly, the actual recommendations addresses what I would see and what the SLP group would see would be the normalisation of going back to council business. 5.1, option 2A, we would support as it is adopted as a way forward for council meetings from November. That is, members come back in the chamber again, subject to the prevailing COVID context. We would also be supporting 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, all inclusive as such. It strikes us that this is probably the best way forward because council business should always be open, and there would probably be an aspect as well that the members of the public may would like to come back in the chamber again and see their local council members debating in public and in the forum that I suppose that this grand chamber is supposed to be for members. But so on that basis, Chair, I would be happy enough to propose the recommendations at number 5.1 to 5.5 inclusive. But I should say just on that, I see at 4.2 there is a qualification where members and officers with dependents with a disability or living in a rural area. So I would probably like a wee bit more elaboration on that. If there was any, what would be the proposals or the elasticity for members and officers if they had difficulties attending meetings, you know. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Minnie. Do you want me to go on with the next speaker, or do you want to take that wee point first? Leave it to yourself, Helen.
Yeah, it's through you, Chair. I mean, the report itself indicates that there's a 3-month pilot period, so certainly anything that goes forward, we can certainly monitor. 2A also identifies that in exceptional circumstances, their provision could be made for remote access. So I suppose the example comes to mind is if somebody has COVID, we really don't want them to be attending physically, but we would appreciate, you know, even virtual participation. It probably isn't an area that specifically officers would get into, but maybe that the member would be liaising with their party leader in terms of whether whether or not they can access remotely. The default being physical attendance. So there is provision, as I say, I think under that option 2A for flexibility to be allowed. But again, it's as I say, we'll continue to monitor that. Thank you. Hopefully that answers your query.
Thank you for that, Ellen. My next speaker is Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And look, I thank Ellen for bringing forward the report here. And as I look at the recommendations here, when I look at 2A and I look at 5.1, 5.1 is the one, Chair, where I have the problem with. And it is those who can attend remotely in limited circumstances. In my opinion, I believe, look, we shouldn't be putting any obstacle in anyone's way. You know, at the end of the day, she said, Ellen has said, if you have COVID, what if your partner is sick? We heard Councillor Harkin saying earlier on he couldn't attend the meeting because his partner was sick. I believe, look, we can support the recommendation, Chair, but I would be proposing that we take out that in limited circumstances. The rest of it, we're very, very happy because, look, many of us here, and this is looking over a number of issues when you look at those who have caring responsibilities, who are, you know, and, you know, at the end of the day, we've all families, and there are parents on here who may not be able to get to a meeting physically, but could do it remotely or online. I think we're alienating those if we go ahead with the limited circumstances. So I would be proposing we can support the recommendation, but we would be proposing that we take out that limited circumstances. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair, and I would support those comments with regard to the removal of the limited access issue. One thing that I don't see in there, and it's already done in one of our committees, is 2:00 start. The planning committee, it works there. Why can't that work with our full council meetings? Was it even considered? Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Alderman Hussey. Yes, absolutely works and was considered. So again, subject to members' views. The use of the term limited is really a matter then for members to consider. So any individual member or indeed any individual officer through liaison with their own party, or in the case of officers with their line manager, there will be provision made for that to take place.
Chair, the Chief Executive has just said it was considered. What I was asking was the 2 p.m. start as with planning considered, and if it wasn't recommended, why not?
Sorry, Chair, I misunderstood the question. We didn't consider the 2 p.m. start, Alderman Hussey. We were simply considering it within the confines of what had previously been agreed by Council with regard to the start dates of full Council and committees. If that's a matter that members wishes to reopen, we could, of course, bring that back in here.
Thank you, John. The next speaker is Councillor Heaney.
Thanks, Chair. Like our position on this is we also support the recommendation, and I think it is timely, and we're glad to see this paper coming on now, just to try and, as Councillor Mooney says, try and get a bit of normality back to how these go. And in relation to Alderman Devaney's point, like surely the solution to that is just the definition of limited circumstances, and that is really up to party leaders to do that. And it was also said there is a pilot of this, so any tweaking or if that causes problems for individual members, then certainly it can be resolved at the end of the pilot period. Because absolutely no one is looking to put barriers in the way of members being able to attend meetings doing that, and if it has to be virtual. So like what we're, as a party, our group will be relatively relaxed on that and on the definition of limited circumstances. So, but I don't think we need to remove it from the recommendations, as that would just be essentially keeping things as they are, which is not what we're trying to do. We are trying to move us back to an in-person chamber. So again, we're happy, and I think it was already proposed, so we're content to second. Can I just ask the question in relation to the pilot itself? I assume the pilot begins in November, given that once this is ratified at full council this month, then it kicks in. So that's fine if that's the case.
Thank you, Councillor Heaney. My next speaker is Councillor Doyle.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ellen. I'm glad to see this paper coming on as well. In terms of the previous comments, I was in agreement originally with Alderman Devaney, but Conor makes a fine point in terms of we should define limited circumstances, because, of course, I find myself in the situation where technically I'm a party leader, but I'm also on my own. So there's no one for me to report to if I can't make a physical meeting. I'm also conscious that, though I don't need to speak for any of them, that independents also are sole individual members. So we'll be keen to ensure that there's flexibility for all, but absolutely behind the proposals. And I'm sure, I mean, even to be fair, I think the point that Derek made is also timely, because, you know, I'm conscious that in some of the circumstances we found ourselves starting a full council meeting at 4 o'clock and spending 4 hours going through minutes and confidential business, which is also in many ways just going through minutes. And whilst some of the issues that come up in Matters Arising are important, you know, I suppose the meat of what we're trying to get to almost would be almost automatically in the second day of the proposed pilot, because the first day would almost certainly be taken up by that, I suppose, technical work. So just ask me maybe to reflect on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Councillor Harkin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, like I'm looking forward to getting as many people will be back into physical meetings, so that not everything is happening virtually, and I you know, I want that to happen as soon as possible. But I also want to make sure that if you know, this is a workplace, and if people can't make it, that they have the hybrid option. So I think that issue of that people shouldn't be unable to access that if they want to utilize it. I think that this is the way that work is now. And then on the second 1 second. There's just, sorry about that. I think that the spreading of the full council meetings over two, I think a lot of people might appreciate that in terms of a meeting that doesn't go as long. But I wonder, I'm happy to try it, but I'm flagging just that there is planning meetings that start at 2 on a Wednesday, and that that would we would have to make sure that they don't clash, obviously. But that would be the only issue I can see with that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. John's just confirmed to me that they wouldn't clash, so that wouldn't be a big issue, but thanks for raising it. Alderman Kerrigan.
Thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me in. I'm not a member of the committee, and but again, I think it's an issue that'll be effectively it's close to my end of things, and it's in regards to as Alderman Devaney has spoke on behalf of our grouping. But I mean, I'm not a member of this committee. I've listened to you there. I have said nothing to now, but I've listened to you from 4 o'clock to now 7:30. I know you had a wee break, but I can do that here. You know, with with the online facility, whereby that wasn't there to start with whenever we came in, and we didn't know COVID was going to kick in and all the rest, and we've been able to adapt to it well. But I'd still be minded we've got to still have that left in place. I mean, to be fair, yes, I'm this year chairing the Environment and Regeneration Committee. I have no problem coming down to chair. I think it's better to chair a meeting from the chamber. But again, the last committee meeting I was at, there was one other member in the chamber. The rest were all virtual. So that aspect's there, but you do have your difficulties there. And with the greatest respect to every committee, and I have respect for all the committees, there are some of our committees which do not last very long. And I've seen me driving, by the time I leave the house and get down and get parked and in, it's taken me an hour, particularly in the middle of the day, to go in for a meeting the last 20 minutes to turn my heel to come back down the road again. Whereby realistically, knowing that meeting is going to be short, I'm not going to run down to the chamber. I'm going to be sitting online to watch it because I'm losing 2 hours for the sake of a 20-minute meeting. So again, I have no issue, but I do just have the issue that the limited circumstances. I mean, I've been able to facilitate to watch you, to listen to this full debate here over all the issues you've raised tonight, and no issue. And if there's anything I wish to come in to speak on, I can, and you'll facilitate that, Chair. But I just wouldn't like to see that removed, or a barrier that you have to check with your party leader if you're allowed to go virtual for a meeting. I just wouldn't be content with that. And again, just nonetheless, even the mileage for the like of myself and other rural councillors, I'm thinking on the ratepayers as well as my own time, but as well as the ratepayers, the claiming mileage up and down the road. So just those couple of wee points, Chair. But just as long as that's emphasised that we still would have that capacity to attend, virtually, I still think that needs to be in place. But to say I'm not a member, but thank you for allowing me in, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Kerrigan. Councillor John Boyle.
Thanks, Chair. It has been proposed and seconded, so I mean, really only just to reflect on a couple of the comments that have been made. I'm curious as to know what committee Alderman Kerrigan is on that does not last very long, because I sit in quite a significant number, which certainly lasts well beyond 3 years. How long have we been here today so far? Oh, nearly 4 hours already, Chair. And obviously, as a member of the Planning Committee for some considerable years, I remember a time when the Planning Committee actually started at 2 o'clock and on one particular occasion ended after 10 p.m. at night. So we stopped doing that because people were getting exhausted. And I think it's something that we should always have reflected on for full council as well, because particularly the people who are sitting up beside you, the officer team who come into work for 8 and 9 in the morning, and sometimes us members, we forget that. And the officer team are employees of the council as much as anybody else is. And so, a meeting over 2 days, it's not really just about suiting ourselves either. It's about helping everybody here to conduct business in a way that works for individuals and across family life, not simply just for the elected representatives. I'm fairly sure everybody would agree with me on that, but I think it's an important point for us to all reflect on as well. I remember, when we started off with the plan, we were doing planning and those meetings were lasting so long that in actual fact, the admin team had to split the meetings in two because it was absolutely just so difficult for a person who was taking the minutes of that particular committee. I'm not going to drag it out, but for us in the SDLP, this is about getting back to normal. And I'm reflecting on what Alderman Kerrigan just said. We're not talking about committees at this point. We're talking about the full council. We're talking about sending out a message to the general public that we want life to get back to normal. We're supportive of that idea. And I'm also reflecting on the fact that sometimes things actually work better between individuals when they can sit down and have a conversation in a room and they're not looking at or even just listening to a disembodied voice on a Zoom call or a WebEx or whatever you want to do. So this is the way to move forward as far as we're concerned. It makes sense. It's logical. If it doesn't work or if there's other ways, then of course we as a council should always be examining those other ways as well. But when we all first got elected, we knew we had to come into this room to conduct business, and nothing in relation to that would have changed only for COVID. It's about coming out of COVID now. It's about sending out a message as well that whilst it's still out there, we all have to, in a sense, learn to live with it and work with it and work around it as well. So just a few reflections in relation to that, Chair. And clearly, I'm supportive of the proposal and the seconding.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. My last speaker on this item is Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Chair. I'll be brief. Councillor Heaney has outlined our party's support for the recommendations, or for the proposal. But there's been a lot of discussion around the decision from the planning committee. They moved to the 4-hour meetings, and from my view as a member of the committee, I feel that it works. And if that can be replicated in terms of full council, absolutely. But one of the key elements of the policy of the procedure for the planning committee is that that there's a defined period, that the 4-hour mark, the meeting stops, and we reconvene at the earliest opportunity. There's no discussion, there's no debate. There can be a bit of flexibility if there's one or two items for information that's at the end of the agenda. We can discuss those, but any major decisions, they're not taken beyond the 4-hour mark. And 3.5 in this report, it sort of deviates from that, where it's submitted that's subject to the views of the mayor. Duration's limited to 4 hours. Now that isn't in terms of the planning committee, the chair doesn't have that discretion. And I feel that because of that, there isn't any argument. Everybody's in a clear understanding. By including the line subject to the views of the mayor could create that uncertainty. And I just wanted to query from officers around the necessity why that line's in. We've seen how it works in the planning committee. We've seen how it doesn't restrict business in terms of, and there is that small degree of flexibility. So just any rationale around subject to the views of the mayor would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
John's just going to take that wee one there.
Yeah, I'll come in on that, Chair. Thanks. No, that's a very valid point, Councillor Jackson. I suppose really the only thing that was behind it was to give that wee bit of flexibility that should there be some little piece of business that if we got to 8 o'clock and we felt we could deal with by 8:10, that the mayor would say to the meeting, we'll continue on for 10 minutes. I suppose the spirit of this was to operate in exactly the same way as the planning committee, which is that, the normal business finished after 4 hours, but there was just that little bit of flexibility towards that point. If, for example, we were on the very last notice of motion and members wished to push through for another 20 minutes or so, that there was an opportunity to do so. But obviously it's subject to members' consideration today. And obviously it's subject to tightening up or changing after the 3-month period. But that was the spirit behind it.
Councillor Boyle, do you want to respond to that?
Just in relation to that, and again, thanks for the clarity, Chief Executive. Chair, it does work in the planning committee. I think all of those who are on the planning committee understand that there is a little bit of flexibility, but Councillor Jackson's quite correct. It's not a decision of the chair of the planning committee. It's generally a decision of the committee. And I viewed, when I saw that line in there, I effectively was thinking to myself, well, the mayor will put it to the room and the room will say, yeah, let's stick around for another half an hour if we have to, and we get through the business, So that's the kind of flexibility I think that we probably were talking about when we saw that in there. And that, it wasn't giving the mayor the power to say, right, you're staying for the rest of the night sort of thing, Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that, Councillor Boyle. Now, the recommendations that are within the report have been both proposed and seconded. And although there was some concerns raised from Alderman Devaney and others around the ability to access, I think that's been clarified and there is a degree of flexibility there. So I'd be happy enough to move on that's been proposed and seconded, that we move forward with that pilot and the recommendations within the report. Okay. So the next 4 items are open for information. Is there items 12 to 15 within the agenda? Is there anybody that wants to raise anything from those items? Just give me a second. Nope. So we will move on. If I can get a proposer and seconder for us to go into confidential. Every hand in the chamber's gone up. Councillor Boyle, I've seen your hand first. I've seen Councillor Hooney's second, so it's proposed and seconded there. So just give it a wee second just till we get on to confidential.